Private chat. All right, welcome everybody. As you can see today, I have a guest, Mac from Macabre Storytelling. If you're not familiar with his channel, definitely go check it out. He has a bunch of different videos from a variety of topics. Lately, I've been seeing you're doing a lot of kind of breakdowns of movies, and I watched a video of yours the other day about how part two of Why the Departed wasn't a good movie. And
Oh
so
yeah.
it's pretty interesting how you break all that stuff down. But you've also done culture pieces too. You talked about the dating world. I guess maybe that was almost a year ago now you did that. And then others, forced diversity, and other kind of culture pieces. I think they're important though.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean the channel mostly started off with just sort of like media analysis, film script analysis, writing tips and, advice. Um and then one day it was right after I'm sure you remember. Do you remember the whole controversy over Kumail Nanjiani? He was getting ready for uh the Eternals, the Marvel film, and he went through a body transformation. And it was pretty evident that with a lot of these male celebrities, there was a lot of evidence that he was probably juicing or
Sure.
taking some sort of stuff on the side, as most of them do. Um, and since I had experience in like the lifting bodybuilding sphere, I made a video on addressing it and talking about steroid controversy in the celebrity sphere, like the leading man action star sphere, and how I thought that was like a massive growing into a massive problem for a lot of young men, as it did on the YouTube sphere with all these bodybuilder influencers and them taking roids and lying about it, and then a bunch of young kids looking up to them and resorting to dangerous methods to try and emulate their results. And yeah, that video took off, so I was like, oh, okay. So this is like another avenue. Like it seems like that there is, and I guess we can kind of discuss this as we go on. I think that there is despite how much there is online content that is centered towards male self improvement, or trying to at least sort of like take an empathetic look at male issues. It's shocking how little substance I think a lot of them are. There's a lot of it out there, but I think most of it is very much lacking in substance, which in turn doesn't really end up helping a lot of the guys who seek it out.
Well, here's a question about for this topic here. How much responsibility do you think the celebrities and content creators have for the role model role that they play? Now, some people, Charles Barkley, will say, I'm no role model, right? And that's what some people will say. But what are your thoughts on that part of it? How much of a responsibility do you think they have to kind of be careful? Because they will be emulated whether they want to be or not, right?
Yeah, so I think there's two levels to that. There is sort of I think something like you and I can agree on, and something that most people I think can agree on, and that is when they are either not really purposefully, but like when they are sort of consciously deceiving the audience in some way. So, for example, my issue with this celebrity, with bodybuilders online or lifting enthusiasts online, influencers, or celebrities in the movies, it's not so much that these guys take steroids. I am, if whatever you want to take and put in your body, that is, for me, that is completely up to you. The issue comes when there is a sort of obfuscation or dishonesty that comes along with it. So, for example, oh, pardon me if you hear background noise. I live in Chicago and the Air and Water show is going on, so apologies for that.
Very
So
Blues
my
Brothers like of you.
wait, what?
Very Blues Brothers like.
Yeah,
When
no, right.
when the train goes by, they say, "How often does that train go by?" So often you won't even notice it.
It's only this one weekend with the Air and Water show, of course. So yeah, so sorry. It's my contention when it comes to like responsibility. My issue is when these celebrities or influencers, they take certain things to achieve their results, but then they either just straight up lie about it, deny it, or they kind of obfuscate. So, for example, a lot of guys in like the lifting community will joke about when they ask these celebrities like The Rock or Chris Evans or Chris Hemsworth, hey, so how did you get your physique? And they're like, oh, just work out, 5 hours a day and I eat chicken, rice, and broccoli, which has sort of become a joking sort of like code word for, yeah, I took some steroids.
Took some glue.
Yeah. And so again, at least from my perspective, it's I understand why these celebrities can't just come out and say, hey, I'm taking steroids, because a lot of these guys, if they work with Disney or something like that, they have to maintain their image. So I understand that. However, I think there is a greater danger in sort of saying, hey, I was able to achieve this body in 3 months of working out and dieting. The issue with that, when they achieved it actually through enhanced means, whether it's steroids, stuff like clenbuterol, what have you. The issue with that is that when young men look at those, hear that, and hear, oh, okay, in order to get that body, I have to do this workout plan and have this diet. And 3 months goes along, and they aren't able to replicate those results. Even 6 months, even a year goes on, and they aren't able to replicate those results. That's when things start to go wrong. That's when guys start to get down on themselves. That's when guys start to think that they're doing something wrong or that they're a failure. And inevitably, it usually leads to them ending up doing, steroids or taking PEDs just to keep up, or resorting to like crash dieting or like really unhealthy means to try and emulate this literally unrealistic depiction. Not necessarily in the body type, but the unrealistic expectations for how long that's going to take. That's the big issue.
Right.
Same thing with bodybuilders online. It's like and again, most of them kind of do this thing where they sort of like, they never kind of say they're natural. They just kind of, you like, there'll be guys who are obviously on steroids and they just kind of never bring it up. I think that's a good medium. It's kind of like the whole audience knows you take steroids, but you don't say you do. I'd rather you be honest about it, but if you have certain sponsorships and whatnot, you can't really be open about it. But then there are the ones who are clearly on steroids and they just lie about it. It's that sort of deception. That is where I think the responsibility, and I think most people can agree on that. And we can get into the other aspect of that in a second, but I think most people can agree that, like, hey, if you were someone online and if you are purposely deceiving people or just straight up lying, I think that is something, not necessarily like, not to, I'm not talking about like via law or anything like that, but I think that is something that the vast majority of people can look to and say, hey, you should hold some responsibility to make sure the information you're putting out is truthful, that you are not deceiving the people who follow you.
Right. I think this is touching on a big issue here. Now, there's the issue of being honest and truthful. Then there's the issue of a toxic positivity that a lot of life coaches and other success gurus, they dance this line too a little bit, right? And this goes into the political sphere too, honestly, where everyone, or a lot of them, they're not being totally honest about how they got to where they are. And there's a lot of variables at play. I know Joe Rogan, for example, he's often talking about the role that luck has played for him. And I think it's important for that to be mentioned because it's part of the truth. And for some people, like you said, they're going to say, oh, this is all it took. When in reality, it's not always all it took. And then it sets people up for failure. And then, like you said, they wonder, why am I not getting the results of this kind of person? And I think, and this goes into the other problem, being truthful doesn't always get you views. And it doesn't always get you popular. And that's the big thing, especially in our society, where I saw a quote the other day, and I forget who it was from, but it said, those who write for fools will be ensured a large audience. Now you can fill in the blank with create content for fools, and then they'll often get a large audience, unfortunately. And it's because people don't like the truth. A lot of times they want to be deceived almost in a way. They want to get the glamour and they want to think, oh, I can get that physique without using any gear, but it's not always true. But they want to believe the fantasy. And the same with Tony Robbins, right? He's one of these guys. To me, he dances the line of toxic positivity, and toxic positivity is almost like gaslighting to me in a lot of ways. It's really just a matter of how the person is perceiving it. Because for some people, it can be gaslighting. For other people, they think, okay, that's just a challenge for me to get better. And they can see it in that light, right? But it's not always so easy for everyone to see that. But this issue that you're touching on here, I think it's a big thing right now that touches a lot of different topics.
Absolutely. And yeah, so the issue there is when it comes to sort of like the toxic positivity, and again, we can kind of touch on this, but it's this sort of idea that, or actually, to go with your Joe Rogan example, that's actually a good one. In my Discord, we've talked a lot. We've had a couple discussions about because this is another aspect of the sort of like manosphere, if you will. There is a lot of talk about like how to become successful, how to become like an alpha male, a top G, a top percent male, whatever, and top G, and they're always trying to like push the guys to be like, hey, you can be successful, how to get rich, yada yada yada. Now, the issue there is that it's not so much that like, again, like with the toxic positivity, it's not so much that like you're giving guys encouraging advice to like, hey, get out there and like grind and like you can improve yourself. That's all well and good. But it's when it starts to like bleed into sort of not really like delusion, but sort of are you familiar with the reality? It was, I think it was coined with when Steve Jobs was at Apple, the reality distortion field.
I've heard the term.
Yeah, so basically it's this idea that sort of, at least from what my understanding was, that Steve Jobs, when he was talking to his workers, he would kind of like make them believe that certain things were possible when really they weren't possible, like just like practically or rationally. But the fact that they were pushing for those impossible standards, it led to them pushing themselves farther than they would have gone otherwise.
Right.
They didn't necessarily reach those standards, but it made them push as if they weren't just settling for like, oh, quarterly goals or good enough. They were trying to meet those impossible standards, and even if they didn't meet them, they still coming up short. They still were way ahead of the game of everyone else.
Right.
Now, on one hand, I kind of see the merits of that, but there's sort of a double-edged sword where it comes with the side effect of the people who are seeking that impossible goal never being satisfied or not really being happy with where they end up. So, for example, when it comes to like all these like masculinity gurus and telling guys to be successful, again, that's all well and great. Here are some strategies to like make money or improve your job position. That's great. But when these same guys say it's like, hey, look, I have like 50 Bugattis, or I have like all these sports cars, or like I'm a multimillionaire, I have these mansions and I'm banging all these biddies. It's like, okay, I'm not saying that that's impossible, but you have to understand that from the perspective, or from sort of like from a realistic standpoint of all the men who are watching you, that is only a possibility for a extremely small percentage of them.
Right.
So, and again, to what you were talking about with like Joe Rogan or that, it's called survivorship bias. Or maybe it's not really. Yeah, I think it's survivorship bias. This idea that like if 100 people start companies and 99 of them fail and they end up broke, but one of them succeeds and becomes a multi-billionaire, that person may, instead of like how you were talking with Joe Rogan, instead of that person recognizing that, hey, I did work hard, but I also there was a lot of luck that played into it, or just like right time, right place sort of stuff that allowed me to, even though everyone else worked just as hard, I was successful for a lot of other factors. That person will look back and just say, it's like, oh, well, those people just didn't work hard enough. Those
You
people
see
just
that
didn't
a
work
lot,
hard
right?
as me. Yeah. And so that, I think, is the main issue when it comes to sort of that, when it comes to guys like pushing like success and all that, is it's like, oh, well, if you don't have like 10 Bugatti, that's because you didn't work hard enough. It's because you didn't want it hard enough. And at some point, again, on one hand, it's like, well, it might motivate guys to get off their ass. Sure. But what ends up happening is that for the guys who, even if they are motivated by that initial advice, they aren't satisfied until they reach these like exorbitant levels that these other guys are talking about. So a guy could get off his ass and, start a company or start a YouTube channel or whatever and start making some decent money. And he moves out of his parents' place and he gets a nice car and he's living a really decent above average life. And it's like, that's awesome. But he's still depressed because he's like, oh, I'm a failure because I don't have 10 Bugattis. And that is sort of like the fear I have, or the concern I have with a lot of this sort of, materialism and this sort of, get rich quick. And of course, like a lot of these guys are pushing bullshit stuff like, cryptocurrencies. It's like, oh yeah, no, this will totally work out. And then of course we saw how that all turned out. Yeah.
You're talking about the hamster wheel, right? And the hamster wheel of once you get success or some sort of narcissistic supply, you just continue to want more and more and more, right?
Exactly.
And I think some of the best people in history, I think they've had that though. And they've had that kind of always self-critical and always wanting more. And it can be used to some people's advantage, I think. It can be. But for others, it will certainly have a much more detrimental effect. And I was listening to After School, that YouTube channel After School, where he does the writing. And then there's a commentary that he's writing about. If you don't know, it's actually a pretty cool channel. But Alan Watts was one he was doing. And he was talking about how the goals and the purposes, they are meaningless, he said. The moment, though, and kind of getting off the hamster wheel of trying to get to the next achievement, because like you just said, is what he said. He said, there's always going to be another goal. And if you're waiting for satisfaction and to be fulfilled into the future, satisfaction will never be now. And this is all very true, right? And then you were talking before about like Tate, for example, and all the things that he does. Like, to me, he's playing a role, and he does probably help some people, but first and foremost, he's there to help himself. Not first and foremost. He's like a Donald Trump to me in that way. First and foremost, he wants to help himself. Now, by coincidence, he will also maybe help some others. But like you said, not everyone's going to be able to have 10 Bugattis. Not everyone's going to be financially free. And some people even say things like, well, financial freedom should be a right. And I think to myself, society couldn't even go on if financial freedom was a right. Who would do all the jobs that nobody wants to do? We need people to do jobs that no one wants to do. Because if someone was financially free, who would be a plumber? Who would be the electrician? Who would be cleaning the bathrooms? Who would be a janitor? Probably not anyone. But necessity makes them do those things. Now, granted, you can get to the top of your field in a cleaning business or a plumbing business and do pretty well. But I'm very grateful for all the people that are in those kinds of positions because we need them. We need the nurses. We need the doctors. We need the accountants. We need the infrastructure people. What would we do without them? And so I think it's important. And I think that's the kind of thing the success gurus, they look over that. They look over it and it's just, oh, no, you don't want to be part of that. You don't want to be part of that rat race. And part of it is true because it is a rat race in a way, but it's a necessary rat race to me. And I'm grateful. I'm super grateful for all the people that do that kind of thing. Like, that kind of stuff is harder for me. Like the job I do when I'm not doing YouTube, I do sales and I do coaching. So part of me wants to do more, but the people that do that stuff on a regular, like 9-to-5 basis, I'm really impressed with them because that would be hard for me. But what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I think it's a two-tiered problem. So like the first issue is when it comes to sort of like this idea of, and it's, I'm not saying you're doing this, but what people often do is they will sort of use that argument of like how, hey, there are a lot of jobs that most people don't want to do but need to be done. Like, so like, well, I mean, I think electricians actually get paid pretty well. Same with like
Sure.
nurses and doctors. But yeah, sort of like lower paying jobs, service workers, customer service workers, retail, et cetera, et cetera. Um, these are sort of jobs that aren't flashy. They aren't really looked upon, you know, with prestige by a lot of people, but they are necessary to a functioning society. Um, However, sometimes people will try to use that argument of like, well, we need them for society to try and argue that keeping them on the lower rungs of the income like spectrum is okay. Like, so like this, there's this idea that like, well, if everyone had a certain level of financial freedom, then garbage men, but then being a garbage man, no one would want to do it. I actually think garbage men make pretty damn good wages, at least in comparison to like some other stuff.
Sure.
But obviously there are trade offs. But the issue there is that I think that they're looking at the situation backwards. Oh, the issue isn't so much that like, well, these are essential services and we need people to do them. So if we keep them sort of in a state of constant desperation, I guess, like financial stress, they will be more apt to do those jobs because they need to. They can't get
Right.
anything else, so they have to do them. Well, the issue with that is that it's not so much that, it's the issue that our society is really warped in a way where we look at certain professions as very prestigious, even though they're useless to a society, and we look at certain jobs as really bad or dingy, even though they are essential to a society. So, for example, like stuff like plumbers, nurses, garbage men, what have you, they're cleaning people, DPW workers. These are jobs that aren't looked um, at like with prestige. They aren't looked at like fancy, like respectable jobs by a good portion of society. And yet, these are the same jobs that are essential to our society running. So the question is, like, why is our society structured in a way where all these jobs that are so essential to making our society work and making you know, our civilization functional, why are all these jobs looked down upon in a way? Whereas other jobs that, frankly, as you and I are YouTube creators, when we're talking about like, influencers and stuff like that, all these jobs that are basically completely useless to society to some extent. And in
Mostly.
many ways, yeah. And with social media, a lot of it actually does a lot of harm to,
Sure.
the self-esteem of a lot of young men and women. Um, why are these jobs why are these considered like, wow, you're, you know,
There's
for
reasons.
example, yeah, for example, like I do YouTube and my other job, I work at a dog adoption center. I think most people would look at they would see like the YouTube as more, you know, more
Prestigious.
prestigious. It's like, oh wow, you have a lot of people who watch you, yada yada yada. Even though from my perspective, I'm like, well, it's fun. I enjoy doing it. But the real meaning, the real work, what I really enjoy is working at the adoption center because I really feel like I'm making a difference there and we're actually, doing good things. Like I love making videos, don't get me wrong. It's a lot of fun. I love my fans. But at the end of the day, is it really making a massive, like tangible impact on society compared to, helping out, stray animals, animals that have been abused, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I personally don't even understand how we got to a place like this where people will look at one job that is entirely essential to our society and frown upon it, and they'll look at other jobs that or something like like a stockbroker or real estate agents, these like well paid and like it's like, oh, fancy prestigious jobs, and yet they really don't add all that much
Right.
to a society. If
Well,
anything, though, they add nothing to a society and just sort of siphon off whatever they can get from other people.
well, it's just what our society values now. We value power, flash, money, prestige, and everywhere we go, we look at social media, TikTok, the kinds of influencers that get famous, and what are they doing? They're not the person, generally speaking, glorifying the regular jobs. Mike Rowe, he was the closest to maybe do that, right? The dirty jobs guy. Where that's kind of what he was doing. He's trying to bring attention to, yeah, these are jobs that are needed, and they're not very charismatic, so to speak. They're not a lot of prestige associated with them, but they're still very needed. And I always remember he was talking to a psychologist that quit his job being a psychologist to become like a septic tank cleaner. And Mike Rowe asked him, why the hell would you do that? And then he said something along the lines of, well, I was tired of dealing with people's crap all the time. And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, septic cleaning, I think, is it's a highly skilled job. I think you get paid like very, very well
Well,
for
I'm
it.
sure it's
Yeah.
probably not a job many people aspire to either. So there's less
Well,
competition in it.
well, so that's sort of like the issue too, is that kind of going back to financial freedom. So when we're talking about financial freedom, at least for me, I don't see that as in like, hey, I have enough money that I can do literally whatever I want. That's probably not going to be the reality for 99.99% of people. When we're talking about financial freedom, is that, well, it's twofold. It's one, it's that you have enough financial security in order to maneuver in the job market. So for example, if you have someone who is making, let's say the only job they can get at the moment is like a $20,000 a year, part-time job. Well, this person is, in many cases, people who are that low on the totem pole financially, it's a lot more difficult for them to sort of like switch jobs or find new employment, not only because of, their environment, maybe, hey, they can find a new job, but they need a car, but they can't afford a car. Another big issue is when it comes to health insurance. If I have a job that pays $30,000 a year and it has like decent health insurance, and let's say I have a medication that I need covered by the insurance, even if I find another job that is for say $50,000, it's like, okay, well, I want to go to that job. But if I quit my current job, then I have a 3-month holdover period for my insurance, because a lot of jobs do that. They have the trial periods, so you can only apply for insurance after say 90 days.
Right.
So even though I want to improve my situation, even though I want to maneuver to that better position, because of the healthcare system as it is, I if I do that, my insurance won't cover the medication I need, and I'm putting myself at risk. Or maybe I have to pay out of pocket, which might cost like a ridiculous amount of money that I can't afford, and then I accrued credit card debt, and then I get the better job, cool, but then I spend the next like 2 years trying to pay that debt off, and then interest is accruing. So when we're talking about financial freedom, I see it more as we're giving people enough, wiggle room, I guess, in order to sort of, yeah, again, maneuver in the job market. This will also allow, this also makes employers, because, there are a lot of employers, there are a lot of work environments that basically say, when it comes to like taking care of their employees, they're basically like, well, you're not gonna quit, you're not gonna get a better job than this, so I can kind of like, they can pull a lot of shit that they otherwise couldn't get away with. Whereas if you're talking with someone who is, indispensable to your company, you're going to do a lot to try and keep that person. Or if you're talking to someone who can find a better offer somewhere else, or a comparable offer, if you start treating them like garbage, that they're just
Well,
going to like fuck off. So, and that sort of is a way that regulates the market. If employers are actually worried about, and this is what we're seeing now with a lot of employers, when they ask all their workers to come back after COVID, they're like, actually, you know what? No, I'm not gonna. And now you have all these employers that are like shitting the bed. They're like, fuck, we can't run our businesses because we're not offering enough incentive for these people to do these jobs, and thus it results in those businesses raising wages or offering more benefits. So it's sort of like a self-regulation of the market. But then the second part, when we're talking about financial freedom, is um, again, giving people enough, again, not like giving them like millions of dollars so they can do whatever they want, but just giving them enough where they're able to sort of pursue things that that actually want to do, as opposed to just that they are sort of like forced to do given their situation. And again, because again, we can have an entire society that if you feel like we need to keep, not you specifically, but if others feel like you need to keep people on the bottom rungs, so they have to do these like jobs that are essential for society, well, at least in my mind, the correct solution is, for the jobs that are essential for society, you need to make them more incentivized for people to do them.
Right.
It like for septic tank cleaning, it doesn't, and like I guarantee this, or even garbage men, what have you. At a certain point, regardless of how like dirty the job or like low bar the job may seem, at a certain money cap, that doesn't matter. Like if Chipotle was paying $40 an hour, I would get my ass over there right now and start doing it, as most would people. At some point, there is a sort of like social aspect of like, oh, this job pays better, but like, I don't want to be a garbage man, or like, I don't want to do this. This is seen as like less than. But at some point, when it comes to like just cold hard cash, at some point that stops mattering. So my view would be, hey, if there are jobs that are like essential to society and you're worried about people not doing them, actually, as a perfect example, there was a case. I think this was a couple of years ago. There was an issue with fruit pickers, I think, down in the southern states, in California. They were running out of workers who were willing to, go out into the fields and pick fruit, even though it was essential. Like, this is essential to like the entire fruit market in the entire United States. And they were trying to use it as a defense as to why they should allow undocumented immigrants.
Okay. Yeah.
So we can pay them like crap, and then we can keep our business afloat. And it's like, it's frustrating because, okay, if this is such an essential service, then it would speak to like common sense that the people who do that job, because they are essential, they should be paid better wages than someone who's doing some like, real estate agent job, or so like some bullshit job that like, you get paid like $15 an hour for, but you're not really doing anything. And that to me is how that's another issue, is that right now our market, our like job market, our sort of employment market is just so unregulated in that sense. It's just so thrown out of whack, just because there are certain jobs that are essential, but they don't pay as much, so people don't want to do them. But then there are other jobs that offer no value. It's strange too when you hear all these stories of like what you would call bullshit jobs, of companies having all these jobs that they're paying a lot of money for in salaries, but at the end of the day, they aren't really adding all that much value to the company. Or they could be like, I work for a real estate company where I kind of talked my way out of a job, because I realized that like as I was like doing the job, I kind of realized, if you just structured things differently, or did this, I wouldn't be necessary as an employee. And I probably shouldn't have like brought that to the attention.
Or you brought it to their attention.
But because it was just so frustrating. It was like, why are you doing things in such like a ass backwards way, and paying all this money to me, to someone, but to me in the case, I mean, I was fine. I ended up on my feet, but it's just very frustrating when you look around and see this, one of the biggest economies in the world, and there's so much that is so ass backwards when it comes to wages, jobs, insurance, et cetera, and it's shocking. Well, actually, it's shocking, but it's not surprising that, as we're seeing now, the entire thing is like just going out of whack.
Well, I think even if they paid people better, like, I'm all for people getting good wages and fair wages. And I guess the people in charge, they feel the need to try to fix, manage, and control everything. And they think, if we don't have our hand on the lever, things will get out of hand. But I don't think they have enough faith, even if they paid the people better, whether it's the fruit pickers or whomever. It's not like they're going to go save all their money and be extremely diligent and then be financially free and not have to work. It's like, no, you give people more money. A lot of people aren't going to do that. They're just going to spend. They're going to spend, and they'll stimulate the economy more. Not everyone's meant to be able to set aside a big percentage of their check every week or every other week and put it into Bitcoin or something. They're just not going to do that. And so I think the way they think about it, it's a little out of hand, because in reality, especially for the big corporations, like what's really happening is they're putting stockholders over their own employees a lot of times, right? Because what makes the stock price go up? Well, better quarterly reports, better financial statements. And if you pay too much to your employees, that could hurt that bottom line a little bit, and that stock price can go down. I hate to be so cynical about it, but I'm pretty sure that's a lot of what's going on right now in this country, where eventually people do need to put the people first, put the employees first, put American people first that are here, and take care of them. I'm of the mindset that if you take care of people and you treat them better, they will do more than what's expected. And that is often true. I will never say it's black and white, always true, but often it is true. And that's exactly what they're afraid to do. And that fruit picker example you're mentioning there, that's a prime example of that. It would have been out of the question for them to say, you know what, we only pay this fruit picker $5 an hour. We could never spend $10 to $15 an hour, or maybe just 15, to get a fruit picker from here, right? That's just out of the question. But it makes you wonder, if $15 an hour for that kind of job is out of the question, how's that business even still in operation? Like there's something going on with the profit flow where that needs to be done better.
Yeah, that was a big question over, when we were talking about raising the minimum wage. Now, I'm not someone who I have a lot of problems with sort of like minimum wage theory. I think it's just sort of like a temporary. It can be like a temporary fix, but I don't think it actually fixes deeper problems in the long run. But when it was happening, a lot of people were talking about, well, if we raise the minimum wage, then a lot of these businesses can't function because they can't afford to pay their employees. And it's like, well, then that business isn't viable. That's a huge proponent of a business. You have to be able to afford, capital and wages. That's like the entire people aren't
Yeah,
just going to
I've
work for
never
free.
bought that part of the argument, because when you have a CEO making millions, tens of millions, you mean to tell me a $5 to $10 an hour increase that costs what, a couple $100 a week extra for each employee, that's going to put you out of business? Like that's going to be too much? I never bought that.
Well, it was sort of it was kind of co-opted by like big like McDonald's, and it's like, okay, yeah, buddy. But they always use the sort of like, well, the mom and pop shops and stuff like that.
Right.
And but the thing is like what they kind of like missed is like, okay, well, if that is the case, if this small business isn't able to thrive or to operate with these wages, well, maybe so that says something about our society. If the only businesses that are able to operate in this, because like the entire theory of like the market is this idea of competition, is that you have several businesses, and if one is like doing some fucky shit or is like, offering a lackluster product, you can go to the other one. But now what's happened is that, and this kind of goes back to the idea of, the social aspect of it, is that there are certain companies have gotten so big, both financially and socially, like the social capital of like Apple is a great example, that even if they start putting out like a really bad, actually perfect example is when it comes to guitars. Are you familiar with guitar brands at all?
Not too much, no.
So there's a guitar brand, and I'm
Gibson.
sure. Oh, well,
That's
perfect.
it.
That's exactly it. So Gibson is probably one of the most widely known guitar brands in the world. Some of the greatest guitarists ever have played Gibsons. However, fast forward over the last like 10, 15 years, Gibson's quality in their products has dropped dramatically. Like the products they're putting out compared to their cost are just shit. Again, they're still good guitars, but how much they're charging for the guitars, you can find a comparable, if not better, guitar for half the price with another manufacturer. However, that brand power is so strong that you still like it. Just they've been riding off that brand power for so long, and it's allowed them to kind of just sell crap, and people buy it because, hey, I'm paying $2,000 for this guitar, which, you know, I can go to Fender and get a comparable guitar, or PRS and get a comparable guitar for maybe like 60-70% of the cost, but it's a Gibson. And so that is a sort of, that whole aspect of the market is something that really, you know, behavioral economics and whatnot, that's something that has really thrown a wrench in, you know, the market performing properly, or
Well,
I
how about this?
shouldn't say properly, but like as ideally as we would like it to.
So, say companies like Uber and Lyft, they were able to operate at a loss in the beginning for multiple years, even before they finally started turning a profit. How is a small business supposed to be able to compete with a large corporation that is able to run at a loss? How long could a small business run at a loss for? They just couldn't, right? And our corporations, they have everything in their advantage. They'll have lobbyists, they'll have all sorts of people talking on their behalf that help them. Our politicians help them, and they just have the legs up so that it does become much more difficult for a small business. That's what Uber and Lyft basically did to the taxis. They were able to undercut them, run at a loss for a little while, and then taxis can't do that. You know, they're living on a much shorter time frame. They need the money quicker, and they just couldn't continue. And that's why they call us what, the corporate welfare state, right? We'll take care of our corporations. We'll bail them out when they're in trouble, but the middleman, the small guys, not so much. Not the small businesses, you're on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what you do about that moving forward, but that's kind of seems to be where we are.
I think in some cases, like when it comes to like, you know, when it comes to stuff like Amazon or Apple, these are just things that just aren't, you can't put, you know, they're sort of like, it's done and gone. Like these businesses have gotten so large that they just sort of are capitalizing the market. It's either, or a better way to put it is, I mean, actually, I think I saw I was actually, my other job, I work at a bar. I was talking to a guy who worked in analytics, and he was actually talking about, I think in the US, 40. So here I'll ask you, what percentage of the US do you think are Apple users? Like what percent of the US who has a phone is it an Apple?
I would 50 to 60.
Oh, see, so you're more moderate. So when I answered, I was like, oh, I would think it would be like 80 or 90%. Because there's Android, of course, but it just never kind of like, I never really, like, it's just what, at least from like my point of view, is Apple, 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 Apple. And when he told me, it's like it's a 55-45 split, I think,
Okay.
in favor of Apple. But I was like, wow, really? Like that's like half the country has Android phones, and yet, at least from like my perception, and I think a lot of people's perception, it's just Apple, 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 Apple. Like, oh, it's everyone has an iPhone, right? So that's very interesting. Like that's a case where like I don't even know how to quantify that. How do you? And same thing with like Gibson with guitars. Is at some point the reputation sort of just overshoots the quality of the products, or like the practical quality of the products. So how do you even like, you know, put the cat back in the bag, if you will?
I don't know if it ever
I don't
happens.
I don't know. Like I think maybe like moving forward, I think the best way would be to, and like obviously this happened with COVID. It was frustrating to see all these, you know, big wigs, you know, the politicians talk about, you know, oh, we need like these relief plans for small businesses, but then the vast majority of them go to massive corporations. If you truly were folk, you know, concerned about like, you know, the little guy, you know, the more, you know, lower class citizens, or I should say like, you know, lower income citizens, you would be giving more relief to these smaller businesses, not like these massive corporations that, you know, it probably sucked for them for a while, but they were in no real danger of going. And then, as you put it, even even if shit hit the fan and these businesses lost everything, they could still operate at a loss for a few years and then just, you know, bounce back after a year or two.
Right. They got the blanket.
Exactly.
So the pivot here, though, too, I want to talk a little bit about the dating world as well. I know I mentioned the incel thing, and I guess maybe the black pill thing too. because it does seem to be picking up more and more traction over the last year or two. This black pilled incel. I mean, a lot of the black pill people don't call themselves incel. I don't know many people who do, for that matter, because it's not really looked at as a good thing. It's the first insult a lot of people will hurl when they disagree with someone, right? They'll say, "Oh, you're just an incel," or something like that, right? But this kind of relates to the political world too, in a way, to me. This guy named Dan Carlin, he has a podcast, or did have a podcast called Common Sense, and one of the titles was "What About the Losers?" And he's talking about the losers in the economy, the people on the lower realms. Like, if that group gets big enough, there's going to be some problems. Regardless of whatever someone thinks, if that group gets big, they can cause some problems for everybody else. And I kind of think there's something similar going on with the black pill / incel movement here, where, or what to call it a movement, I don't know. But there's a lot of people who are kind of striking out of the sexual marketplace here. And that group is getting bigger. And sometimes they unfortunately gravitate to content creators that are a little more on the negative side and kind of reinforce some of the more negative beliefs. And then, of course, when you're in the echo chamber, all that happens is you get more and more extreme. And unfortunately, a lot of the guys who are smart in that community, they've already been there. They've already been married. They've already had kids, and it didn't go well, and they get divorced. And that's why they do their thing. And they tell people, the younger people, don't make the same mistakes I did, right? So this is what's going on. But what are your thoughts on that whole situation that's going on? Because I think you did a good job at addressing some of it in that one video you made about just the male-female dynamics and how it's going on right now. But it's an issue that has a very sensitive trigger for people. There's a lot of sensitivity, I guess, for lack of a better word, on both sides. It becomes very difficult to talk about.
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to that. So the first part is I do see, I agree with you that I think the sort of like incel, black pill, those sort of communities are growing, like alarmingly so. And I think part of the reason that is or at least a major reason, is the failure of the current red pill community. So, like, in the dating video I spoke of, it's like, look, as much as I shit on, the red pill community, what I'm talking about is how it currently exists. I actually think a really decent red pill community, or a manosphere, like, or even like a men's rights organization, MRA, men's rights activist organization. I think these things are all great. The concept of them, especially with red pill, because a lot of guys, yeah, they've kind of like been raised on this idea of, when it comes to relationships, they have just as, like, obviously, like, I talk a lot about, like, the red pill toxicity, but there are a lot of toxic ideas on the other end. It's like, hey, if I'm just really nice and I'm just myself, and like, I'll find like in the movies, the girl will come running and we'll fall in love and everything will be fine. And it's like, that's not how life works. It's not, it's the dating world is a lot more, or like romance, attraction, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot more complicated than that. And there are some sort of, harsh truths that you have to, accept. For example, it's like, hey, as much as I'd like to tell you, it's like, oh, you're going to find a girl who likes you for you just the way you are. It's like, well, I mean, depends. If you're very overweight, if you smell, if you don't have any aspirations or hobbies, then what are you going to do? Like you're not just going to like go out into the world and you're going to find some beautiful girl who's like, oh, you're like, I love you because you're so sweet. It's like, no, sorry.
Probably
like
not.
you have to, there are certain pills that you, for lack of a better word, that you have to swallow. If you're a guy who's 5'7", sorry, like it's
going to be tougher for them, right?
Well,
that's
that's
one of the things that makes someone an incel. Now, there's some people that think, oh, no one is really an incel. Everyone could work their way out of it if they wanted to. And I think that's a simplistic view, because there are things like you're saying. You don't choose your face. You don't choose your height. You don't choose your upbringing and how you were raised. And there are some people that are just not going to have a charismatic personality. And then it comes down to how much can you cultivate some of those things?
Hmm.
How much can you cultivate an attractive personality? Especially if you have to overcome not the most flattering of faces, and maybe you're short, or fill in the blank with any number of these characteristics you didn't choose.
Well,
So
I
I
think I think you hit the nail on the head where the key is, and this is the difference between sort of, I guess, what you would call white pill and black pill, as they kind of like, this sort of
right.
lingo online, is that there's a difference between saying, "Hey, I'm 5'7", dating is going to be much harder for me," and "Hey, I'm 5'7", dating is a waste of time for me. I
Yes.
think that there is a very big difference between those. Now, currently, what I think the red pill movement should do is, hey, there are these like harsh truths, these are these realities of life that you have to accept and that you have to like sort of like internalize before you go out in the dating market, because we don't want you to, a lot of young guys, they go out, they meet a girl who's, very toxic herself, they get their heart broken, and it like ruins their entire life, and they cry and wallow, and they just, it just destroys them. We don't want that to happen. So you need to kind of have some guidance before going out there. My issue with the current red pill space as it is that even though they don't say they are black pill, so many of the creators and this like the current, bigger channels or bigger influencers in the red pill space, they frame the dating world or, women in general. They frame all of that in such a dark, pessimistic, like doomer way that so many guys, when they watch that, they can't help but like, well, why even bother with all this? And that's how they go the black pill. Like, for example, if you take, again, like, there are plenty of channels that I've seen. They're like, hey, here are some, harsh truths that you're going to have to know, but let's see how you can improve, and let's see how we can sort of like, compensate for them, and let's see how you can make the best of your situation. The best thing about that is that even if particular guy after a year doesn't even have success with women, he's probably going to be in a much better place than he would have been.
Well, I think this touches on what we were talking about earlier and the honesty thing. I think what some of the red pill folks have done is kind of gaslight the people that are not as well off. And they'll
Hmm.
say, oh, bro, you can get the girls just like me. All you got to do is this. It's easy. See, just do this. But they don't acknowledge as much of, no, actually, you know what? It's not going to be that easy for everyone. Like, I acknowledge it because it's just a fact. It's a fact that some people are going to have it harder than others in the dating world as a man. And a lot of the red pill guys don't really seem to have much patience for that part. And then the guys, there doesn't really seem to be too much in between there either, where it's either you're just a pro, everyone can go to the gym and get big and do whatever and get women, or what do they call it, frame game looks or whatever. And then the other side is just, oh, straight to the black pill. And unfortunately, the MGTOW black pill, there's a lot of people that gravitate to them, and their channels get much bigger, much faster. And they're given the red meat. They give the red meat, the little tilted towards the black pill stuff. Someone like a Better Bachelor, for example. I'm not sure if you know him, but I wouldn't call
And,
him black pill. But
well,
he was
so
certainly tilted towards the women and dating is just not worth it right now. And
that's
you
sort of the
saw how
key.
his
Yeah.
channel grew, and it's just you see more of that than say the fresh and fit type channels that really kind of blow up. There's only like one of him, and you can say a lot about Andrew Tate too, but I wouldn't call him black pill per se. He's more like
Well,
success guru.
you hit the nail on the head with Better Bachelor. I am unfortunately aware of him.
Oh, of
Um,
course.
so here's the issue, and you really hit the nail on the head. The issue is that you have all these red pill channels that are supposedly just telling you, oh, they're just telling you, the truth and how it is so you can be a better man. The problem is that there is so many of these spaces have become infected with just like bitterness and anger and resentment towards women that it ends up painting a picture of modern women, as they say, to such a ridiculously negative degree that if you're a regular, here's an example. If I'm a regular guy, I'm having trouble in my love life, and I go onto these red pill channels who supposedly are trying to teach me hey, here's how to improve yourself and be better. And then the first thing I hear is that all modern women are hypergamous sluts, and if you aren't 6 foot tall, have a 9-inch dick, and have a six pack and a 6-figure salary, then it's just basically over for you. And then me, who's maybe only making $30,000 a year, I'm 5'10", I'm you don't have a 6-pack, but you're not super fat, but you don't have a ripped 6-pack. If a guy like that hears that advice, it's no surprise that guy will eventually, after absorbing it and listening to it a lot, will just give up. But then that same red pill guy will be oh, well, I have no patience for people who give up. It's well, you painted such a bleak picture. You paint of women, of dating, of just the whole shabacle, and then you sort of detest the guys who just give up and cut their losses. And it's because you're not. And again, this is the issue. A lot of these red pill spaces that are supposed to encourage men to become better, they aren't giving them that much encouragement. They've really leaned into this sort of. They've kind of like Better Bachelor. A lot of these channels have sort of leaned into negativity and just the dour state of the world and the downfall of the modern women and stuff. And so yeah, it's no surprise at all that the red pill as it exists today, mostly, and as it continues forward, will eventually funnel more to the black pill, more so than
We're
white
seeing
pill.
it.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
there is a fine line sometimes between realism and negativity. And I think the people who get big on YouTube or wherever, there isn't much room for nuance with them.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a lot of nuance, that person probably doesn't blow up, right? But people want to, if they're going to go somewhere, they want something to be all this, all success guru, or all pickup woman, or all black pill, all doomer. And they're just the ones that they get the most fame. When in reality, I think there's a lot of room for nuance, for a discussion that, hey, it's not going to be easy for everybody, right? And understanding everyone. And maybe there's a room for a few channels like that out there that say, you know what? We're not going to deny some of the black pill stuff. I'm not going to deny some of the red pill stuff either, because I think it's a combination. It's a combination. There's a little truth in all of it. But I wouldn't say you got to be careful going all in to one side or the other. And that's the same way I see the political role too, for that matter. I mean, you can't go all in. I think there's a little truth in a lot of places, but the second you think that it's only this, you're kind of running into a dead end.
And that's a perfect segue. You kind of mentioned them, but I think that is a perfect example of kind of going back to our discussion about responsibility as a content creator. Let's take, for example, Fresh and Fit. So, well, backing up a bit, I think we touched on this the last time that we spoke. There's sort of for lack of a better word, there's a certain handicap when it comes to guys getting into the red pill sphere. And that is that the vast majority of guys who end up getting into sort of the red pill sphere, the manosphere, on average, if not for the vast majority, I would say they usually get drawn to those communities because they already have a sort of pre-existing resentment for women, or they've had a very bad experience. What I mean by that is if a guy is just living his life, and he's just kind of hunky-dory and is doing okay, that person is less likely to find these sort of red pill communities or Fresh and Fit, or at least sort of take them to heart as much.
Lauren Southern was mentioning that and I saw
Yeah.
that discussion with her and Rolo. But that's pretty much what she said.
Yeah, it's like already your audience, the vast majority of them are gonna be in this sort of like let's say like someone's like on the like someone's middle ground, like they're even keeled. Most of the guys will kind of like tilt towards they'll be more what's the word I'm looking for? They'll be more responsive to content that already solidifies their beliefs. So if a lot of guys are coming into the space that already have either negative views of women or resentful views of women, like maybe they were a nerd in high school and they had to watch Stacy fuck Chad for 4 years and they're kind of like really angry and bitter about it. And then they go to these red pill communities that are supposedly trying to help them. Well, as a creator, as sort of like the mentor, you have to and this kind of goes back again, the responsibility, or at least what I would say is that if your goal is to truly help them, you have to understand where they're coming from. You have to understand their initial biases, and critique your you have to critique your message accordingly. If now I don't when I say you have to, I don't necessarily mean you have the like you are forced to, you have the responsibility to. But if you are saying, "Hey, my goal is to help men," then and to some extent, I think you do have a responsibility to curtail your message to make sure it doesn't tip one way or the other. What I've seen in a lot of these red pill communities is that they claim we want to help men, we want to make them better. But and this goes back to the financial side. Financially, that only goes so far. Self improvement really only goes so far because let's say I'm a fitness trainer and I have a client, they come in, and it's like, hey, I want to get in shape. Okay, let's get you into shape. It's like, okay, that person comes in, we train for like 2 or 3 months, and that person goes on their way with all the knowledge I've given them. That's how it should be. But what I see, to kind of compare it, what I see a lot in the fitness sphere is that people found out is that if we keep people in this, as you put it, the hamster wheel of doing these crash diets or these fad diets or like these like really like bullshit like workout, like the new hot workout, but all it does is keep people like losing and gaining the same 10 to 15 pounds. That person, we can squeeze that person for years. It's not just going to be 2 or 3 months. We can keep them, and I see a lot
So
happening.
psychiatrists may think that too.
Exactly, and I see that happening in the red pill sphere, where whether it's Fresh and Fit or Rolo or any of these guys, they sort of realized that even if they will speak, like Fresh and Fit's a good example. Like a lot of people who defend them will say it's like, well, they talk about self improvement, they talk about this, yada yada yada. But if you go to their channel and you look at their top rated videos, or even if you watch some of their episodes, what are they doing the vast majority of the time? They're just kind of dunking on women. Like all their top videos are like, we put these ratchet bitches in their place, like we kicked them out. And the issue there is that okay, the problem is that one of the biggest proponents for me of guys being successful with women is you have to get rid of your resentment. You have to get rid of this like again, if you're a guy who had a lot of trouble in high school or college, I completely understand that you're probably pissed. Like it's just you feel like a loser, you're just angry. You're like, what am I doing wrong? I'm a good person, I'm a good guy. Why aren't I having the success I want? Why don't girls find me attractive? Why are all these like, dickhead douchebag guys getting laid? And it's not so much that they are angry at the women. I think they're just sort of angry, that they're frustrated, and it kind of comes off as a resentment towards women. The problem is that a lot of these red pill channels nowadays, they're sort of feeding off of that. They're sort of leaning into it because they realize, hey, if I help a guy gain confidence and become a top G, well, then he goes off and he's a top G. But if I can keep a guy in this space frustrated and angry, he will keep coming back to my streams. He will keep like Fresh and Fit's a perfect example. If you like watch their episodes, they say the exact same shit every single fucking episode. It's
Yeah,
just
they do.
it's different girls, but it's the same talking points. Kevin Samuels was the same way. Rolo's the same way. Better Bachelor's the same. Like it's just the recycling of information, and they're all. That's the irony too. Is like a lot of these guys aren't even offering that like the whole thing with Andrew Tate, he's not really saying anything, at least for me, that I haven't heard come out of the mouths of 50 other masculinity gurus over the last like 3 or 4 years. But it just when a different pool of young guys come in, he's just the one that they latch onto. So yeah, that's really my fear, is that a lot of these red pill guys, whether they're doing it intentionally or not, I don't really care at this point because it's having the same effect, is that instead of actually promoting guys to actually improve themselves and do better in their lives, they're keeping them in this sort of hamster wheel of bitterness and anger and resentment that keeps them coming back, that keeps them buying their, bullshit affiliate programs or their new, self-help book. But it isn't really helping these guys, because again, if it was helping them, then they would stop, they would get the information they need and then go on their way.
Well, you're talking about the big capitalism dilemma, ultimately.
Basically, yeah.
What do you do? Do you do what's right via principles, or do you do what's best for your wallet and what's best for your attention?
And I think that's
not always the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that kind of loops back to your responsibility, the question, where do these guys have the responsibility to do, the right thing, to actually do what is probably objectively best for the young guys watching? Well, they don't have a responsibility in the sense of like they have to, or it's not like they're a doctor and they're going to get their license revoked or anything like that. But when we're talking about sort of like a principle ethical, sphere, at least for you and me, and I think we would agree, is like, as men, our job should be, or at least part of what, my view of masculinity is helping other young men along, is helping them and trying to like genuinely help them, not just make a quick buck off of them. Obviously, you have to make a living, but, no, we really want to help you. Like when I made the male dating video, it wasn't like, that wasn't really like a big focus of my channel. It was just that it was really hard to see so many young guys who were so fucking lost and so frustrated, but the only avenues for them were like these bullshit like Fresh and Fit or Andrew Tate or whoever. And I was surprised to find that a lot of the response was that a lot of those same guys who were like, thank you for there's finally like a middle ground here. It's not just like blue pill. It's like, oh, you'll find a girl for you. Don't worry. You don't have to change one bit. Or like, people who were just kind of like giving them appeasing self-help, toxic positivity bullshit, or the red pill, black pill shit where I log on because I'm desperate for help, but then I end up just as miserable as before.
I think that's one of the big reasons that video caught on for you, was because it was a middle ground there that kind of was able to take a look at all the sides. And it was a pretty balanced view on the whole thing, is what that was. And I do agree with you that to get people to get rid of their resentments when you go to a red pill channel or even a black pill thing, that would be good. And I know some of the red pill guys, they do mention it, but it's probably not emphasized. Right? It's not what they emphasize with their actions and go on and on about. And now I think the other thing you mentioned, like the blue pill guys, I think the blue pill guys that are really successful with women because they've just been a natural, I think they contribute a lot too to the pushing people into the black pill's arms, because they don't understand them one bit. They Absolutely. Give them, like, I'm not sure if you watched this the other day, but Joe Rogan was interviewing Chris Williamson. Did you see this?
No, Chris Williamson. Oh, I think I'm familiar with him. I've seen a couple of his videos on the, the rise of like single men. Yeah, I'm not really a fan of him. I think his takes on stuff are a little bit off, but sorry, but go on. My apologies.
So Chris Williamson, he mentioned to Joe Rogan about, oh, have you ever heard of the MGTOW community? And Joe Rogan said, no, he hadn't. And then they were talking about it for a little bit. And you can just tell by how Joe Rogan talks about it, he just does not care one bit about guys who struggle with that kind of thing and their problems. He just doesn't care. But that's very common, though, amongst guys that never been an issue for. They just don't care. And they'll be the first one to say, oh, you're an incel, you're a loser, you're the next school shooter. And they're the guys that usually bullied the black-pilled guys, right, growing up in high school.
It's like it's like 6'4" Chad coming up to you and you're like, hey, how do you talk to girls? I want to learn. And he's like, just talk to girls, bro. Just be
Right.
confident, bro. It's
And
like,
that guy will
that's
never
not,
admit that 80 something percent of what makes him attractive to women is something that he had zero control over. He's 6'4". He will be looked at favorably by a lot of women just because he's 6'4".
and it's sort of like a positive feedback loop. This guy, he
Yeah,
got positive attention from women, made him more confident. That way he's more confident. Women are attracted to that. And so it just kind of escalates
it
more.
snowballs.
And to be fair, with some cat like Joe Rogan, I think he's just kind of an idiot. Like with that, it's like for like if like if it's like a Chad in high school, if he's a younger guy, there are some cases where I think some of these guys because they've never been the other guy, they're not being facetious. They're not being like condescending. They literally just like, hey, how are you so good with women? And the guy's just kind of like, I don't know. I just talked to them. I don't think this guy is being condescending. I think in some cases these guys are just because they've never seen the other side of being a guy who has really actually struggled with women or attraction. They literally just don't understand the perspective. They just when you ask them like, hey, how do you get good with girls? They're like, I honestly literally have no idea. I don't know what to tell you because I've never been on the other end of the spectrum. Whereas with someone like Joe Rogan, it kind of gets to the point where it's like seeing as he's like what is he a billionaire now? No, probably a
He's
millionaire.
he's hundreds and he might be worth a couple hundred mil by now.
Yeah, so it's frustrating for him to say that because it's like Joe, do you not realize that like you have found such incredible success and you're one of those guys who it's like, well, if some guys are struggling, you know they just didn't work hard enough. And it's like, come on, man, have a little bit of self-awareness, like extend a little
He
bit of
airs to that side for sure.
yeah.
And he's even listened to people such as Sam Harris talk about his determinism, free will thing. And he'll listen to him and then he'll still kind of come out the other side and say,
Yeah,
yeah, I hear that side, but you just didn't work hard enough. Right.
yeah, well,
And
it's hard because there is a middle ground because like
yeah,
to your extent, the MGTOW community of all of them pisses me off the most because I think that the MGTOW community could be great. I think that if you're a guy and you're like, in your early 20s, it's very similar to how it is with women. It's like, look, if you want a relationship, if you want the wife and kids and all that stuff, that's awesome. Go for it. You should do what you want. On the other hand, it's like, look, if you've gotten older, you've had some relationships and it's just, it's just not something you want, you're not really finding fulfillment in it, then it's okay to be, you can be a bachelor, you can be single, you can, maybe not do like the whole settle down with wife and kids thing. Mainly because I don't want what I end up ironically is a lot of people like, blame the high divorce rate on, it's like, well, society nowadays and yada 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 and like, lack of commitment and stuff like that. From what I've actually seen, like on the actual evidence I've seen, I think one of the bigger reasons for that is that people end up getting married to people they don't really want to marry, or because you're supposed to. Oh, I'm 29 years old and I'm not married yet. Like, does that make me a loser? I don't want to
right.
be a 40-year-old single person. And it's like, so what ends up happening is people end up marrying people it's like, oh well, they're good enough. It's like I don't really love this person. I like them enough, and they get married and have kids because that's what they're supposed to do. And then in 5 or 10 years, they're miserable because they're stuck in a marriage with someone who they really didn't have a huge desire to marry, as opposed to it's like, well, they were there and I don't want to be a loser. Now, obviously that's different for women because of the biological aspect of it. If you're a woman and you want to have children, that well personally I think adoption, I think if we made that process a little bit less it's
Very
hard.
tedious now.
It's hard because on one hand you're like, well, don't you think adoption should be like really strict and like to make sure we vet these parents like the best possible? And I'm like,
Yes.
yes, but on the other hand, I think the way we do so is more about financial liability, which isn't always the best way to go. Like, it's gotten to the point where I think in some cases with adoption where it gets to the point where the process is so daunting and in many cases incredibly expensive that a lot of very loving parents that would love a child just aren't able to do so financially. So it's and then of course that leaves a lot of children in the foster care system, which is underfunded, and it usually leads to not the best outcomes for them. So it's hard because I don't want to say like, well, we should we should vet parents less for the adoption process. I don't. That's not the right way to put it, but I think as of right now, it's because I think what 400,000 kids in the foster care system right now. It's heartbreaking. But so sorry, just to wrap back around. But yeah, it's like, look, if you're a guy, I don't, and you feel like you want to be single, you just want to do casual, just go your own way. I think that is awesome. However, and it should be if that's what you want to do, you should have support, and like you shouldn't feel weird or like like a taboo or a pariah for not doing so if you don't want to. However, unfortunately, it seems like the vast majority of the MGTOW community is just guys that are so butthurt at women that it's just one massive cope for guys who desperately really want relationships with women, but they aren't able to because they're of their own issues, because they think women are, hypergamous sluts, whatever, modern women, feminism, yada yada yada. And it's just one giant cope. Kind of going back to what you said. Well, it's funny. One of the big red pill lines is, don't listen to what women say, observe what they do. I actually think that that's not a woman thing. That's a people thing for me.
Sure.
When I look at MGTOW, I hear all this stuff come out of their mouths. It's like, yeah, man, you shouldn't worry about women. You shouldn't shouldn't be a big deal. You shouldn't even look at them. They shouldn't even be on your radar. And yet when I see all these MGTOW channels and videos just constantly talking about women and talking badly about them, it's like if a friend of yours is like, yeah, I'm totally over my ex. But then every single time you see him, he brings up his ex. Eventually you're going to be like, well, you're clearly not over your ex. Even though you say you are, you clearly aren't over your ex. And that's unfortunately what I think. Again, MGTOW community, if you're a guy, you just want to go your own way, I think that's awesome.
I think they need to be very honest with themselves, though.
Exactly.
And so if someone really wishes to be okay with women, even if they have some things going against them, like their height or their face or whatever, that it is possible to do learn some dating stuff. You can learn some seduction stuff. It does work. Like there is stuff in that part that does work. And I think if they were to be honest with themselves, and they got to recognize it is harder, though. It is harder to develop your personality and to become attractive to women. That's the harder route. The easier route is just drifting to the MGTOW black pill world and just wallowing. That's the easier way, right? And so the first thing I would ask them is, are you really okay not getting with women? Because if you really want to be, but you're not, then that's going to be a problem down the line. Right?
Exactly.
So if you're really honest with yourself, okay, go do that. That's fine. Right? You think, as they'll say, the juice isn't worth the squeeze because you think, oh, I got too many things going against me, so it's just not worth it. Okay. But then own it whenever you choose. And when you own it,
or if you're someone who well, I could have a relationship. It's not like I'm completely hopeless in the dating arena, but I choose to be single just because it's not something that I find all that fulfilling, which I think is totally fine. I think that's great. But like you said, it does take a very large amount of self-awareness, and I think in some cases experience. It's in my opinion,
both. It takes both, and that doesn't happen for them. Obviously, you can't get experience overnight.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too, is that I wonder if you could pull it, how many guys in the MGTOW community have actually been in a relationship. And it's sort of like, or a better way to put it is, how many of these guys have actually been in multiple relationships? Because I can see a case where a guy, is dating a girl and she fucks him over really, really bad. And that can fuck him up, mentally, emotionally, whatever. And that might lead to him just writing off relationships altogether. And it's hard because on one hand, you're like, well, look, I understand your concern, but you're sort of allowing this one bad experience to sort of poison your views on women and relationships altogether. I can't really, again, I'm not going to force a person to like, no, you need to get back out there. But it's, if you're still sort of like allowing this relationship from like 4 or 5 years ago to really like weigh on your conscience to the point where you can't even go on a date with someone else, then that's something where I think it's probably an issue of you probably didn't have that much of a solid foundation at the beginning. Like I
Sure,
always,
there's something on their side of the
yeah,
street that was going wrong, and that's
yeah, like
part of the reason.
or at least like I tell guys like, look, before you even get into the dating sphere, you you need to sort of be in a place where if you aren't successful, you'll still be okay. You might be disappointed, but like so many times I see guys who were like really depressed and really just like down themselves because they have nothing going on. Maybe they're living with their parents. They don't like their job. They don't really feel like men. Maybe they don't work out or like exercise. They don't have hobbies, anything that fulfills them. And they think, well, if I get a girlfriend, that'll fix all my problems and I'll feel confident. And if you do get a girlfriend, maybe you will feel confident. It might help. But then what happens if you break up in 6 months?
And then he's toast.
And then not only are you sad from breaking up with your girlfriend, but now you sink back deeper into the hole because that person was the only thing you had in your entire life. And and another issue a lot of these guys run into is that when they view women as their only source of validation, that usually comes off in the relationship. So if like say like if a woman's dating a guy and the guy doesn't seem to have anything going on, doesn't have any friends, doesn't have a job, like a career aspirations, doesn't really have hobbies, over time that guy's probably going to get needy, or he's probably going to be a lot more, you know, it's going to come off like he's a lot more invested, or I shouldn't say invested, but like a lot more, he's relying a lot more on this relationship working for his own sake than the other party is. And that will probably end up leading to a lot of pressure being put on the other party, and the women being like, actually, you know what, I don't want to, because no one in a relationship wants to feel like I am your, I mean, I guess for some people, I guess like for Andrew Tate and like the Fresh and Fit guys, they want to be like hyper worshipped. But at least me personally, I don't, like, if I have a girlfriend, my girlfriend of 4 years, I don't want to be the only thing in your life. I'm glad to be a part of your life, an important part of your life, but I don't want it to be a thing where if like we were to break up, you would just completely fall apart. I wouldn't personally find that to be an attractive quality. And that's a lot of pressure you're putting on me. Like if we broke up and you just like your life was completely destroyed and ruined, that's a lot to put on one person. I want you to have friends. I
Well, I
want you
think
to
that's
have
something that's not talked about much in the MGTOW world is one of the big benefits. Because I know if someone goes to AA or NA, for example, in the beginning they tell them, don't date for the first year. Cultivate your life for the first year after you stop drinking or drugging, and develop some hobbies, develop some same-sex friendships. And I think the paradox of that is if you do that and then you stop searching and seeking for dating, sex, and validation, you can actually become more attractive because you're into your own life, right? And I've always wondered why they don't focus on that part as much in the MGTOW world, where hey, okay, you're not going to even choose to date women casually or sleep with women at all. Okay, well, that leaves you more opportunities to do X, Y, and Z.
exactly.
Cultivate your things, cultivate whatever you want. And I know why it doesn't happen that way, because where's the clicks? Where's the clicks in doing that? Where's the fun in that? It's not as much. So it doesn't get emphasized.
Like if I were running like a MGTOW channel, I'd be like, I might have a little content that's like, yeah, man, I probably actually, this is just me, but if I were talking about like MGTOW, if I had like a MGTOW channel, I probably wouldn't even talk about women at all. I would like have videos. It's like, hey guys, here's places to meet friends. Here are ways that you can find other hobbies. Here are some crafts, or like here's like a martial art that you can learn, like stuff to dive into and kind of like fill your life, something besides a relationship. Because if you have a MGTOW channel and like these are guys who like don't want to concern themselves with women, but all you're talking about is women and relationships, it's like a like what are you doing? Like you're just it's like
Well, Schadenfreude for one.
it's almost
Um,
like looking up your ex's pictures with her new boyfriend on Facebook. It's
it's
like
like
you're
one of
just
the
like
videos I watched of yours that have something in the intro with something along the lines of "There's nothing more fun than pointing out the faults in others" or something like that.
yes.
And it's
Or
that. That's what that is too.
it's feeding into that. There's a certain of and some people have a problem with it, but I think it actually is a real thing, especially for guys online. Have you heard of the concept of digital self-harm?
No, I've never heard of that, but I can imagine what it is.
Yeah, so basically it's the idea that you seek out media that makes you feel bad. A perfect example is or again like a good metaphor is like looking at your ex's Facebook photos with her new boyfriend or something. It's like, why are you doing this to yourself? A good example, and this is kind of like what I see in like the red pill community and the black pill community is like, hey, we're talking about red pill. Let's look up a bunch of stories of wives fucking over their husbands. And it's like, okay, at what point does this become like, hey, here's some advice on how to avoid putting yourself in a position where you're dating a toxic woman? Like, I think that's fine. Like, if we're like, hey, we're trying to like help you avoid women who will try to take advantage of you, I think that's fantastic. That's good advice. But then it starts to bleed over where it gets into like, it's almost like torture porn in a way. It's almost like you're watching it because it makes you really feel angry. Like this, like hearing this story about this poor guy who got fucked over by his like bitch ex-wife. You just keep watching it and it makes you angry and it makes you like resent these women more.
I know what they would say. Their defense would be, "We don't want people to forget what could happen," and that would be their maybe plausible deniability, perhaps. But it ultimately is the clicks. That's
Yeah.
the reason. Ultimately, and this is where everyone can take a look in the mirror. If people are unhappy about what's growing out there, it's more than likely growing because there's a lot of people liking it and clicking it, following it, engaging with it, and that begins to snowball. Now, part of it on YouTube here is, of course, YouTube does have some power. They can get someone's channel out there if they wanted to. Now, granted, I don't think they're doing much to help the MGTOW folks, right? That really is just the people. That's what gets engagement, and that's what starts to grow. Because I'm pretty sure YouTube doesn't really want them to grow, I would think. And I was watching a video about this the other day where they said, you ever heard about the API? I think it is, where they give all YouTube channels a score, like an API score that was in one of their codes, and they don't even talk about it. But this guy was mentioning how that's what they do to every channel. They give you an API score, and the ones with better API scores do better, and they get promoted more. And because the guy is like he has about the same amount of subscribers you do now. He's got like 96,000 or something, and he was upset about his lack of viewership on his channel, even though he had at the time of this video 60,000. And he was saying that part of it is this score that YouTube doesn't talk to you about. And second thing he was talking about was it doesn't benefit YouTube, he said, to divert the views and attention to small creators because that doesn't get the advertisers as much exposure
Mm-hmm.
because they want to send the people to people that will get eyeballs on them and the advertisers will be happier and they get more money. So I was unfamiliar about this concept until literally yesterday, but I thought it was pretty interesting and probably true about that API thing. And I bet you the MGTOW people, the reason why I mentioned this, Black Pill and MGTOW folks, they probably have a very low API score.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the people that are watching them and giving them the organic watch time and engagement that gets those channels to grow.
Well, it's interesting because I'm sure it is like an ebb and flow, but like you see stuff like with Fresh and Fit. Do you remember? Oh my God, it must have been like maybe a year ago. Do you remember the big falling out situation with ABBA and Preach?
Yep.
and and then Abba and Preach made a response video, and they were actually pretty. From what I remember of the initial video, it wasn't like that bad. It was kind of like, hey, we're pointing out some like contradictions of what they're talking about, but like they weren't like super negative.
Right.
And then Myron, of course, just goes like fucking nuclear, and they start.
They leaned in. They leaned
Right.
in.
Well, didn't they? I think the big thing, and this is like where it got really fucked up, is didn't they like issue a couple false copyright claims?
They did do that.
Yeah,
They did
that
that
was
bunch of
where,
YouTube channels.
and I think Fresh and Fit ended up losing like what 100,000 subscribers in the span of like only maybe like a week.
They did. They did then, yeah.
Yeah, but then it died down, and then it bounced back, and now they're up to like I think 500,000.
It did hurt them temporarily, but they overcame it.
Well, that's the thing. It's like for YouTube, it's like, okay, I understand that you're like for a lot of these like, and maybe it's more of the incel black pill variety that they're trying to suppress, given the fact that especially like in the news, like even the term incel is very politically tumultuous at the moment, given its connection to like mass shooters and whatnot. But it's ironic how like they'll try and suppress that, but then they will like seem to prop up these red pill channels, even though these red pill channels end up being a sort of gateway to a lot of these black pill.
I don't think they think it through like that.
Yeah, they absolutely
I doubt they do.
They don't.
Even the incel, even the word incel as an insult, I've never really even liked that very much. Because so in my own life, I've been on both sides of the world too. I've been time in my lower 20s where I was not very successful involuntarily because I was just had extreme anxiety and I was awkward. And that's really all it takes, right? To have women not be attracted to you or those kinds of things. Very awkward, insecure.
Or I think a better way to put it is that it prevents you from putting yourself, and this is like because a lot of this is like very like frame specific or very sort of like nuanced. I think the thing is that it isn't so much that women aren't attracted to because like I've met plenty of women who are they don't all just want to go for that the alpha Chad who's like really loud and boisterous. A lot of girls do find like shyness or humbleness, like they find it endearing. However, the issue is that guys who are like that usually are not able to put themselves in positions where they are able to sort of even like interact with women. Like it, if you like, you could be a really great guy. You could be, attractive. You could be a truly good person who has a lot to offer. But if you aren't able to go up and ask that girl at the bar to talk, then you're never able to get into that position to kind of show who you are.
Yeah, being in the right location is humongous. I remember Dan Bilzerian, I think, was talking about that. Someone asked him, "What are your suggestions for dating?" And he said something along the lines of what you just said. He goes, "You got to put yourself in a spot where you're going to interact with a lot of women. And if you do that, then it can go better." And I agree with him there that if a lot of it is, you just got to be in that spot, not just behind a computer screen, not just behind your smartphone, but that. But speaking of the incel thing again, I've never liked that insult because it's really viewing it as if your ability to get women is something that really you should be judged on. Right? You're an involuntary celibate, so that means you're a loser because you wish you were sleeping with women, but you're not. And that's like the ultimate of, and I'd say 80% of people love that insulting term. It's like the one that everyone can agree on. That and small dick stuff. Those two are humongous, and they're the first things that are thrown around. If someone starts talking a little bit like the way a black pill person would talk, or even Andrew Tate to an extent, the way if they hear people talking like them, oh, you're an incel. Oh, you've got small dick energy. And I think those kind of terms, they perpetuate the problem too, honestly.
Oh,
I think
absolutely. 100%.
It pushes people more into the community of the black pill stuff. And they say, well, at least they understand me here. At least I can be myself here. Because people don't want to think about part of their bad attitude isn't just from the get. I think part of the bad attitude is their experiences too. Like the experiences contributed to it. And now between the two, it's turned into quite the dilemma here. And I think with
Exactly.
anything manosphere related, there needs to be individualized treatment, so to speak, individualized help, because everyone's scenario is going to be a little bit different. But when you have content creators, it's got to be more blanket this, blanket that. And people fall through the cracks, though, when there's going to be blanket treatments and blanket solutions.
Hmm.
But that's one of the reasons why I put myself out there to try to collect some of that people who need individualized treatment. The people that find my channel, for example, often they were with a cluster B woman, like a narcissistic or borderline woman, and they got chewed up and spit out by them, which, that happens. And they find someone like me, where hopefully I don't come off like I'm hating on women the way I talk, but I try to be just realistic and say, yeah, this is what happened. But I also want to make a point to know that there's probably something we could have done better in there, because that's all we can take a look at anyway, is our side of the street. And I think working in within our circle of influence, what else can we do besides that?
Hmm.
Because if we're not working in our circle of influence, what are we? We're victims and powerless then. So we may as well try to do what we can.
Well, so just to touch upon that, I no, I think from what I've seen of your stuff, you're good. The issue I have is when, and this kind of folds into a lot of the issue with the red pill sphere, is that a lot of their reliance is on like really like shitty pop evo psych. When they're talking about like female nature. Now, I'm not denying that there are certain biological differences between men and women. I'm not denying that certain, given our current society and certain other factors, like, so for example, uh, if you're a guy, you probably will, on average, probably have to make the first move.
Yep.
That might be for biological reasons to some extent. That could also be for like sociological reasons. But diving into that stuff, like that's just like sort of like a harsh truth. It's like you probably gonna need to make the first move on average. A girl is not gonna like. On average, a girl's probably not gonna come up and make the first move. I think things would improve if women were encouraged to do that more. But so the issue I have with a lot of the sort of like red pill, when they kind of try to talk about evo psych, which like they don't really understand the science or the discipline, so they'll throw out a lot of stuff regarding to female nature or like female biology, yada yada yada. And what ends up happening is like what you were touching on. It's totally fine to give guys advice on how to avoid toxic women. Like that is very good, especially for guys who are socially awkward. They might be on the spectrum. They have a very difficult time reading social cues and sort of having a level of like social awareness or social tact. These guys are very at danger for being taken advantage of by a woman who kind of can sense that, and like she knows that she can wrap him around his finger. I think that's a very good. The problem is that when you sort of start talking about like you female nature and stuff, it sort of like implicitly throws this net out over all women. It's like, hey, even if you meet a girl who isn't like that, you have to be worried that she might be like that, or she always sort of has that capability inside of her, and you have to be on guard. Now, to some extent, there is something to be said about like, hey, you should always protect yourself, because again, a relationship, you are putting yourself out there, you are putting yourself into a vulnerable position. But there is a point where it gets to where does that cross over into just straight up fear mongering? I've talked about the same thing on sort of like the opposite side of like, when we're talking about like radical feminists. There is obviously something to be said about like people giving advice for women. It's like, hey, if you're going out on dates, if you're dating men, you have to like be cautious. You have to take precautions and keep yourself safe. Absolutely. But then when it starts to get into like, because I've seen some like really like weird shit where they're like, you can't even like go out with men because like they're all potential
Right.
rapists and stuff like that. And it's very funny how a lot of like the red pill sphere I've seen, it's the other side of the coin of like, because when I was younger, I was like really into the anti like super radical feminist sphere. So I saw a lot of their tactics, a lot of their talking points, a lot of their all that stuff. it's amazing how much of it's like a mirror image of the red pill community, where it's like
Sure, that makes
they have,
sense.
yeah. And to add to that, um, sorry, um, we were talking about giving advice, and then what was the other thing? Sorry.
So we're talking about giving advice and about how female nature and the blanket thing.
Oh yeah, but before that, it was God. I don't know why my mind is like blanking.
About who you talk to and individualized treatment and protecting women or men from toxic women, and what else? There's been a lot. I don't remember.
I know we kind of got in a roll there. Oh, my apologies. Because I did kind of go on a tangent. Talking about incel and talking
Oh
about
yeah,
how that can be very damaging. So the one huge thing that you see across all like the red pill spheres, whether it's red pill, black pill, MGTOW, incel, however, no matter how much they disagree with each other, no matter how different their views might be, there's one constant, and that is that for almost all of these men, their entire sense of validation comes from their success with women. Whether that is like women being attracted to them, being just like getting laid, having like, like a lot of like tons of chicks around. At the end of the day, all of it comes from this idea that if it doesn't matter what else you are, if you have, it doesn't matter if you're like an accomplished guitarist, doesn't matter if you have a lot of passions, doesn't matter if you're have a loving family and a really strong friend group, or it doesn't matter if you have a job where you help people. At the end of the day, the core tenet is if you are a failure with women, or if women are not attracted to you, then you are not a man. And
there's some of that. There's
yeah,
some of that.
I think that's like the underlying current. Like even someone like through Andrew Tate, like even he has all this stuff, and he'll flat out say it's like it, or it's always like a proxy. Like even like Fresh and Fit, they'll talk about, well, you shouldn't chase women, you should chase success, and women will follow. And it's like, well, yeah, but you're still putting the emphasis on getting the women. Like it's always kind of like that's like the underlying thing for a lot of these guys. Now, what I think, like at least from my perception, is that it's that mindset that ends up fucking up so many guys. Because no matter what you do, no matter what you try to do, it's always this thing in the back of your head where I am seeking validation from external sources, particularly like women. Um, so, and what you were talking about when people like call guys incels, when they talk about like, oh, small dick, you just like women don't want to fuck you, you are reinforcing that. You're basically saying, hey, you're a bad person, or like you're a loser because women won't fuck you. And it's like, it's the people who say that shit don't realize that they're reinforcing the very thing that leads guys to these like red pill communities, because they're literally saying it's like, hey, you're a loser because you can't get laid. And it's like, and the guy's like, well, okay, I'm going to go out and find out how to get laid. And it becomes this like obsession. No matter what, like I've met guys who are like, again, incredibly talented. They have a lot going on. They have a good job, strong family, good friends. They're great people. They help others. And yet they feel like fucking losers because of their lack of success with women.
I
Because that,
understand. It can
yeah,
feel that way sometimes too, though, unfortunately. And I think I'm not sure if that's a biological or evolutionary thing, but it's same with the opposite can feel like you're succeeding to a point too. Like say if a guy you're getting the success or the approval of a lot of women, it can feel like you're succeeding, even if the rest of your life is nothing.
hmm,
I'm not sure what that's all about, but I know I've felt that before. Now,
I think it's just to answer. I think it's like a mix of both. I think there obviously is like getting validation from others, particularly the opposite sex. I think that is important. I think that is like built into us. There is a certain level of, I mean, not just from the opposite sex, but just validation in general. Like like countless studies have said, just like social interaction is just in general, friends, family, whatever, community. That is a massive part of our bio. Like people who don't have those support structures, they just overall they do worse on every measure. Confidence, just health, et cetera, et cetera. They die younger, et cetera, et cetera. But then there is an element where I think our society really pushes that. Like we see media that tells us, hey, if you're a guy getting girls, then that means you're like a real man, you're masculine.
Sure.
Or going back to the idea of like, the blue pill movies, what is the prize at the end of all the movies? What does the
Woman.
nerd get at the end of the movie? The girl. It's always this idea that the idealization of success for men is women. And it's unfortunate because, and again, I do understand to some extent, but it gets to a point where it gets so out of control where it supersedes everything else in a dude's life, where a guy can have everything in front of him, but if he doesn't, or there are some cases where like I've met guys who have really good girlfriends, like they have like they're very stable relationships, but when they like look at like these sort of like masculinity gurus, and they're like, well, if you don't have, you know, if you
Well,
don't
they
have
do
like
say
10 women or like a dozen, like a harem of bitches like crawling after your dick, then it's like, and it kind of like gets in the guy's heads and it ends up fucking over their like healthy relationship.
well, it's similar to how you said they should be emphasizing the removing of resentment. They do say women should complement your life and not be the focus. Now, people say that to varying degrees, of course. And if you look at their actions, maybe it doesn't seem like that, right? Because, like you said with Freshman Fit, their after hours shows are the ones that really blow up. So they may say in the other shows, yeah, women should be the complement, not the focus, but it doesn't appear that way because of what their actions are doing, right? But
Exactly.
why are their actions doing that? Because of views and reinforcement. Now, to what you were saying about the feminism and then the red pill and female nature stuff, I do think it's good to know the worst possible outcomes, to know what's possible, right? So with the men, it's like, you want to know what's possible with women. Just like with women, yeah, you're going to want to know what's possible with men. You want to be careful because you don't want to have the worst case. But it doesn't mean you focus on it, doesn't mean you blow that pup out of proportion. But in order to be well adjusted, I think you do need to know it. That's why I err towards, yeah, you should know about female nature and you should know what men are capable of if you're a woman. I know if I was a father, I would do that for my daughter. Like, yeah, you're going to want to know that guys think about sex a lot. So you got to keep that in the back of your mind, right? In all the situations you're going to be in. Now, does that mean you should focus on it? No, but I don't think they shouldn't be told it. I think they should be told it. It's just a matter of to what degree is it actually focused on. And I think that's what you're mentioning is that they focus on it a lot, perhaps.
Or rather that, but also the fact that there's sort of this, and again, it's less about like when I think actually a perfect example of it is in Rollo's. If you read The Rational Male, there is one line in Rollo's book that I think speaks to this perfectly, and this is sort of what the sort of like general theme I'm talking about. There's one line, I'll have to look it up because we talked about it in my Discord. He says something like, well, let's face it, most women aren't able to like, most women don't really know what they want, or something was like, most women don't something, they aren't able to make, it was something like, let's be honest, most women don't take accountability. But in the book, it said, most women, and then in parentheses, let's be honest, all women, close parentheses, don't take responsibility.
Okay.
So that's sort of like what I'm talking about, where it gets to the point where a lot of these guys, it'll be under the assumption, like what they'll kind of like vocalize is, hey, we're just like trying to give you advice and tell you the worst possible outcome about toxic women. But then when you actually look at what their content is, what they're focusing on, what they're emphasizing, when they're talking about like, like nature or biology, they're kind of throwing these wide nets where the general gist, even if they never vocalize it, the general gist you get from a lot of these. I mean, even Rich Cooper, when we were talking about, a woman who's, it's like, well, yeah, but there are women out there who are, kind and won't like try to fuck you over and like do this stuff. And he called them he called them unicorns. It's like, okay, so you're equating a good woman to a mythical creature that doesn't exist. And that's sort of, again, it's all this sort of, and again, they never vocalize it, but again, to their own lesson, watch what they do, not what they say. It creates this impression for a lot of guys that, or a better way to put it, as even if there is like a small percentage of women out there who, you know, have overcome their nature and they aren't like poisoned by feminism and they aren't, you know, going to like backstab you or like trade up for monkey branch to some other like alpha chad the moment she can and humiliate and cuck you, do you really want to take that chance? And that is sort of the issue that I have with the red pill community, where it ends up turning all these guys into like to just give up, because when you paint the picture so negatively, and again, but that's where the line is, right? There is a difference between, hey, I think I used this metaphor last time we talked. There's a difference between saying, hey, when you go out of the house, look both ways before crossing the street, because you know you don't want to get hit by a car. That's completely different than saying, hey, if you go outside the house, there's like a 99% chance a car is going to like run over and like crush your head and like your brains are going to splatter everywhere.
Well, that's a good way to put it. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Where what I would say to guys is, no, be aware, but pay attention to your own experience. You don't want to project what you think might happen because someone said to you, you're going to get hit by a car, or no women will be accountable. It's like, well, see if that's true in your life, right? Don't go in with that expectation, but a lot of this comes down to being able to take a step back and observe and just see what's going on in your own life, right? Because you can't go through the prism of, okay, I was listening to the red pill or the black pill, or if you're a woman with the feminist stuff, and they'll say every man's a patriarchal oppressor. It's like, well, is that true? Or are you going to live your life and see how true it really is? It might be in some circumstances. I won't say never, but if you lived your life, maybe you wouldn't see it to be that true. But that's what I say to guys, like, you learn, but don't take anything as a gospel. Don't take anything as an all black or all white. It's like, you take it in, but then you put it through your own filter. And I think that's maybe what a lot of guys who are younger are missing, is their own filter. Like, I have a filter. I have a filter I put everything through because I have a pretty good sense of self today. Mm-hmm. Right? So I'll listen to anybody and I'll think, I like the expression, take what you like and leave the rest. And that's how I try to play. And a lot of people aren't capable of that, perhaps. And they just run with it.
Yeah, so that I think is the crux of the issue. And this is like where it gets to, and this kind of like wraps everything up with like responsibility and stuff like that. So like for me personally, it was, I had before I kind of got into like the red pill pickup artist, crap. I had dated a few women. I had some success, but not a lot. And I was older. I was like 22 or 23, I think, around my age. And for me, well, that's the other thing. I live in Chicago, so it's a big city. So when I started going out with women and like going on dates, ironically, it was the exact opposite. Where when I started dating women and interacting with women, that's when I kind of realized that a lot of like the red pill stuff wasn't really true, or it wasn't as holistic as they were putting out. I realized it's like, oh no, I totally met some women who were like this, who were like very materialistic, who like the first question out of their mouth was like, so how much do you make? And like, shit like that. I have met like very toxic women who like they loved like fucking, like, I met this one woman who was like, it didn't really hit me until after, because I was still sort of like, pretty like in my nude phase. This is a woman who really enjoyed fucking with guys, like, guys who are really insecure, kind of like baiting and like, hey, like, oh, you're kind of cute, like kind of getting their hopes up and then just like humiliating them, like going with them to like a club or something and then like hitting on another guy right in front of them because she like enjoyed doing that. So, but then I also met women who were wonderful women who were just like incredible, and they were nothing like these like women that like the red pill guys told me that all women inherently were. And so it was that experience that kind of allowed me to kind of gain that filter, like you said. Okay, so now I can sort of like look at these communities. I can see whether what they're saying is true or has a nugget of truth in it, but then I can also just throw out all the bullshit that they're doing just to get clicks. However, and this is like where again it gets to like the responsibility. In a time when so many young men are coming up, and in a time when social media and YouTube and Twitter and all this stuff is sort of, it has Destiny, the streamer, he put it really well. Social media was supposed to augment your social experiences, but nowadays it has taken the place of your social experiences. So we have so many guys who end up getting into, who end up coming across like red pill or black pill spaces, fresh and fit, whatever, without any sort of experience. Like there are guys who like will, you know, watch like fresh and fit or like, you know, red pill or black pill stuff. They'll get into it and they have zero experience with women. Like they, or a perfect example is do you know the YouTuber Wheat Waffles?
Yep.
Yeah, so he's like a black pillar. He like kind of throws out all this like bullshit pseudoscience about like your face shape, and but basically it's just like a lot of just like bullshit black pill content. He was on an interview with someone and they were like, I forget who it was. Oh, I think it was Kevin Ray Wilder, I think. And
I've heard
or
that name too.
or Alex from Playing with Fire. Those two guys, I like their stuff. We don't agree on everything, but I think they're a better
I
brand.
know them. I know
Yeah,
Alex.
I think Alex and Kevin are. We probably won't agree on everything, but I think they're a much better brand of red pill. Like I know that those two, like they fucking hate Rilla because, well,
They do.
good.
They've offered to debate him. I know that. Or they were going to have debates with anyone who wanted to. I know that.
Yeah, well, Rilla blocked me on Twitter, so. But anyways, so with Wheat Waffles, they were asking him, and it's like, okay, so what is your actual like? So you have all this expertise about face shapes and women and their behavior. What is your actual experience with women? And I think, and like I didn't know this before when I was like came across his channel. I think Wheat Waffles is like what 22, 23 years old, and I
He's
think he
young.
said he's like dated two women in his life, and it's like, okay, so you're a guy who's like 22, you've only dated two women in your life, and you're talking about all this stuff very confidently, very matter of factly, very science based. And then, but now you're talking to two guys who, Alex and Kevin, who probably have had a lot more experience with women, in not just because they're older, but both sexually, romantically, and just being social people. We have had like way more social interaction with women, and our experience with women is a lot more healthy and a lot more measured and a lot more nuanced. So why is it that so many guys tend to gravitate towards, why are they listening to like the Wheat Waffles? Like why are they listening to you guys and not the guys who have actually had a lot more experience with women? And again, this is where it gets into like a weird space where you have all these young guys before they even are able to get out into the world and have those experiences with women, they end up getting infected by
Yeah, it's
this
being tainted.
toxicity. And again, it's hard because now you have guys who, even if a guy goes out and like, even if like he watches all this red pill and black pill content and all this shit, and then he still goes out and tries to like socially interact with women or meet women or try to date, he's already tainted so much with this negativity and this fear of like what this, like I've heard all these horror stories of what women have done to men and what they truly are underneath the mask and like how their true behavior is. And it prevents them really, or at least in my experience from what I've seen from guys, it prevents them from ever putting themselves in a position where they can gain that filter. They're so horrified of getting out there because they've heard all this shit about women and about like, all this stuff
And
that
this
they
is a new
can't
problem,
even.
though. This
Yeah.
is new because this form of content, and it's really mostly YouTube and TikTok, mostly, right? Podcasts are older, but this kind of topic wasn't really a podcast topic. but on YouTube and TikTok it is. And there's people of various ages, 22, 23 like Wheat Waffles, 50 plus like Rolo or Aaron Clary or whomever that's in their late 40s. There's so many varying degrees of experience. And, you know, they're coming at it from whatever their level is. And maybe they, and probably not, they probably don't all think about, okay, what's the 18-year-old boy who's watching my stuff? What's he going to think of this? Am I putting him in the best mindset? Like, you almost got to have different help for different age groups, because you're going to take something different to kids in the high school, I would think, than you would with guys in their 20s, when then you would with guys in their 30s. That's what you would need to do if you really wanted to help productively. But again, I think it turns into a blanket problem, right? They're just coming at it, and from their space. And someone like Wheat Waffles, I don't know who he thinks he is, talking so confidently about things that I don't know how he could know. I only really seen him because he was on Troy Francis's channel, which is kind of surprising because Troy Francis is a pickup guy. But Troy Francis is a good guy. So I was kind of surprised that Wheat Waffles was on there. But it's tough. It's tough for people to develop that filter. And it's not going to happen overnight, that's for sure. But this social media experiment, like you said, what that guy said, that streamer said, Destiny, you said his name was?
Mm-hmm.
People don't know how this is going to turn out when this is people's social experience, not actually out there, right? We don't know what this is going to do. It's yet to be seen. We're in the middle of an experiment. So,
and that's sort of like, again, to kind of bring it back to like the responsibility argument. Well, to your point about when we're talking about experience levels, it is, I do tell people, it's like, you guys, when we're talking about like the red pill sphere and stuff like that, you do have to like look at the irony of like when you think about like the top people who are present in the space, like when you have like Rolo, who's been married for 25 years, it's like I've been in a relationship with 4 years. I don't think that I could speak confidently on what's going on with like Tinder nowadays. Like from what I've heard from like guys who are currently on, Tinder is like a totally different space.
Sure.
From what I did when I was,
so it might changes. Have been it changes, right?
So, well, that's the thing. It's like, so that's sort of like the issue. It's like, if you're going to give advice, you kind of have to have it, you have to either talk with other people who are in the space, or you have to be very empathetic to like looking at new experiences. Or like when you have Myron on Fresh and Fit, I can't, like, this is what never made sense to me. Like, do you remember when like that whole thing came out with was it Anna Fitness, when she released the DMs of like Myron trying to basically like, hey,
sugar baby or something,
or like, you can come on the podcast, but like I only collaborate with girls I'm dating. So basically it's like, hey, if you want to come on. And what frustrated me was like, you know, guys, like when like the people who watch him and like these like, you know, alpha guys, it's like, doesn't that kind of like give you pause that like someone who's like, you know, in these positions, or like to talk about like alpha and high value, that they're doing stuff like this, but it never I think so many guys are so clueless, or they're so desperate for like that sort of validation. They just want like a lot of these guys to tell them what they want to hear, with as opposed to actually like giving them like stuff they need to hear, or like good advice. But to bring it back to the responsibility thing, so here's like kind of like the ultimate question to kind of wrap all this up. At what point, and like I think we've kind of gone over it, you've made a lot of good points about sort of like the inherent nature of online social media, monetization, capitalism, stuff like that, where it's a lot more, in order to get seen, you have to kind of lean into the extremes. So the channels that are more measured, which could actually do guys better, aren't being seen. But is there a certain balance between leaning into the extreme to get seen, but then also being able to help guys? So the question is, and again, on the topic of responsibility, where is the line for content creators where they are able to start to see what direction their audience is going, or what sort of reception they're receiving from their audience based on their content, and acting accordingly or changing course based on that. So one example that I gave in my we talked about it on some of my call-in streams is are you familiar with Alexander Grace?
Yep.
Yeah, so he's someone who talks a lot about like, dating and female nature and biology and stuff. So he's someone where if you actually like listen to his videos, so I have a lot of problem. Like I think that he's like just for the most part just
Is he a
straight up.
MGTOW guy or more of a dating guy?
He's kind of not either. He kind of like tries to like be under the umbrella of like I'm just talking about biology and stuff. Like it kind of like reminds me a lot of like Wheat Waffles, where it's just sort of like he's like
Like
using a lot of
Darius?
wait what?
Is it like Darius?
Yeah, or it's like it's kind of like Wheat Waffles in the way where it's like it's the same red pill BS, but it's being packaged in a very like they're saying the same toxic things, but in a non-toxic manner. Like Wheat Waffles, like
Okay.
he'll say a lot of stupid shit, but because he's kind of talking in like sort of like a well-mannered voice or talking about science or
Packaged
throwing
better.
words at, yeah, basically. So so I criticized him. I was like, a lot of the stuff he says is just like very wrong, isn't correct, is based on bullshit, and it ends up just reinforcing the same stuff that like the toxic guys do. Just it doesn't come off as vitriolic.
He's got a big channel too, doesn't he? He's got like over 200,000, I think.
So like this is sort of like the issue. If you actually like go to like his comments and like actually see the way his audience is receiving like the messages, even though he says like I'm not into red pill, I'm not into toxicity, I'm not into hating women, if you actually like go to his like comments, if you actually look at how his audience is receiving like his content, you will find it's a lot more vitriolic and a lot more angry and bitter than than the content seems to imply. And when I point this out to people, they say it's like, well, he can't control that. He has no control over, how his audience is accepting his message. But so this is the question. At what point do we hold content creators responsible for the content they put out? And when they realize that that content is being perceived in a certain way, seeing that it's being perceived a certain way and not doing anything to sort of like change up their message or kind of reflect on that, at what point do we remove them of accountability? Or at what point do we say, okay, it seems like you're making a choice. It seems like you are fully, because again, like we're talking like you're not just like young, you're not like someone like Wheat Waffles who's like a young kid, but even him, like we're talking about grown men. You can clearly see the vibe or sort of like the reaction you're getting from your audience. You're seeing the sort of people that you're attracting. At at what point do we hold you accountable if you aren't willing to sort of either address it or change course to try to alleviate or try to change the vibe of your channel?
That seems like a troubling thought to me because it either means getting rid of some sort of free speech on a platform, censoring, or thirdly, what would accountability look like?
Mm-hmm.
How does one be held accountable? Now, I'm for people being able to say what they want to say. Now, sometimes that means there's consequences. Sometimes, like you can't yell fire in a movie theater, consequences, right? So I do believe there should be the free speech. But as far as holding a content creator accountable for the beliefs of their audience, I don't really know how you do that. I don't even know if you want to do that either, honestly.
Well, when I'm talking about accountability, I'm talking about more, not necessarily like any sort of like punitive action, but I'm simply saying it's like now my interpretation or my view of that content creator has changed. So,
Well,
for
that's
example,
okay.
yeah,
That's
I
different
think
though.
so. Like when I say it's like, hey, I think so. Like Alexander Grace is a good example. Like most people, I think on average, most people will look at someone like Better Bachelor And even like most guys, even if they are kind of red pill, they'll kind of say it's like, yeah, he is toxic. He is like really bitter. He really is really angry. And there are different degrees of it. With someone like, even like, so let's take Wheat Waffles for example. It's so you and I, like, our problems with him would be, it's like, hey, even if you are sort of like preaching this message of like, hey, I'm not trying to be angry at women. I'm not trying to instill anger in men. I'm not trying to make things worse. I'm trying to make things better by doing this. But if I start putting content out there and I can see with my own two eyes, because again, if you're running the channel, you can see your comments, you can see everything. If you start to see that, hey, the content that I'm putting out there seems to be attracting an audience that is a lot more vitriolic than my intended, what I intend, I'm starting to like attract a lot of guys who just straight up are like very bitter and very angry and don't seem to like women that much. If you draw attention to that, to the content creator, for me, how the content creator responds tells me about that person. So if the person says it's like, yeah, actually, you know what, this isn't in line with my message, I'm going to try and change things up because my messaging clearly is flawed for my intended goal. It's being taken in a direction I didn't intend. So I'm going to try and change things up and make an effort to try and alleviate that.
I think you're asking for a very hard thing for a lot of them to do,
It
because
is.
it'd be asking them to put morality or principles above the views.
Well, that's,
And so
yeah.
here's some guys creating content, and I can tell you what probably the mindset would be. They're just probably ecstatic they're growing and they're getting more likes and subscribers and comments. And probably the last thing they want to do is discourage that, even if it means they are more toxic. It's a lot for them to do. I'd be very impressed if they did, but realistically, I don't think very many would. Do
And
you?
I think, oh no, I don't think so. And I think that's the issue. So if I were to tell a content creator that and say, okay, hey, you say you preach positivity and you want to help guys, but it seems like you're attracting audiences where you're actually just kind of making things worse, where you're kind of just like instilling them in anger. Can I convince you to change gears and try to alleviate that as much as you can to stay in line with your stated principles? Now the person, and if the person says no, I'm not going to do that, there are two explanations. One, as you said, even though these aren't in line with my stated principles, the views and the money is just too good that I kind of have to I have to run with it. I'm not gonna, because if I change course, I'm gonna lose my audience. This actually happens. Do you know the YouTuber Hunter Avalon?
I don't know if I know him now.
He got big like about 4 or 5 years ago. He hopped on board of like the whole like anti SJW shtick.
Oh,
Well, what ended up happening is that he realized that as time went on, he started to generate an audience that was like a bit too extreme for his liking. Like they were like he thought that we were just like, hey, we're laughing at like really cringy feminist, right? But then all of a sudden he started to get like, there was a lot of like, homophobia and transphobia in his
okay.
audience. And he was like, and like,
Slippery.
and sincerely, he was like, wait, hang on. Whoa. I sincerely don't believe in these things, but now I recognize that my channel has kind of like, through maybe my carelessness, if you would, or even my ignorance, I have generated that audience. But he's a pretty big channel.
Well, I
And
mean,
he
open the
had,
door, right? It's like, so a progressive, people who are into progressive stuff, you could say that opens the door to socialism to communism. Now, is it that? No, not necessarily, but it opens the door, right? It's
and
the opposite for the right, right? It opened the door, you Republican. Well, it opens the door for X, Y, and Z things a little bit too, like the anti SJW. like a Jordan Peterson kind of person, it opens the door. So people even blame Sam Harris for that, for talking to people like Charles Murray about the bell curve and whatnot.
Mhm.
Oh, they say you're opening the door to what could be these racist beliefs down the line. Now, does it mean those discussions shouldn't be had? I don't think so. I think those discussions should be had, but I don't think you can stop it from opening the door a little bit. Now,
Yeah.
one more thing. So I think the answer, though, is conversations sort of like this. So if someone has an issue with Alexander Grace, I would invite him on and say, okay, let's talk about it. Because if anything's going to work, I think that would. And not necessarily from a place of judgment, but from a place of, hey, like from a peer to peer, content creator to content creator. Let's talk a little bit. And then, we record it. And it'll actually probably be pretty interesting. And I think you can do that with anyone, as long as you can have the discourse to do it. But as soon as you get rid of the discourse, if there is no discourse, then that's it. There's nowhere to go from there. But I think talking it out is very beneficial.
Well, so to kind of get back where we're talking about, when you were talking about like the opening the door, funny enough, there are actually a lot of more progressive lefty content creators like Destiny has said this, ContraPoints has said this, where they were successful in bringing a lot of people away from like falling into like the alt-right or like falling into like that space. But then they opened the door and those same people went like way farther left to their own liking, where they started like having like full on like tankies in their audience. And they're like, wait, whoa, hold on.
What are they?
What's like tankies? Like people
What
who
is
were
that?
like, hey, maybe Stalin wasn't as bad as like, maybe
Well,
he has some, like, yeah, it's like hardcore, like, left, like,
Mao, I like some
whoa.
Mao too.
Like the people who like unironically, it's like maybe communism would work. And it's like, no.
Yeah,
Like
some people will just go to the extremes. They can't help themselves.
Yeah. Well, and this is why I respect people like, Destiny or ContraPoints, is because they realized that. They saw what was happening in their communities and they addressed it. They're like, hang on, you guys seem to be like, or at least maybe I wasn't clear with my ideas of what I'm trying to say, but I want to make it clear that I'm not, this is not like where I am. Like, this isn't like, even if it costs me subscribers, even if it costs me viewers, I need to hold on to my integrity and like my stated principles and remain true to them, and not allow this to get too out of hand. With Hunter Avalon, what happened with him was that it got so out of control that he was like, I think he had like over 1 million subs. And what happened was that he had this audience of like kind of like pretty extreme, like homophobia, transphobia, very like anti-progressive. And he wasn't in line with that anymore. Or I think he said even as he got older, his views started to change himself. But he had already cultivated this audience of these people. But the problem was at that time, I think he had a newborn. He had a wife and a child that he was supporting with his YouTube channel. And so he was horrified. It's like, well, if I try to address this, there's a chance that like all these people who were watching me or fans of me are going to turn on a dime. I'm going to lose X amount of subscribers and the entire channel. It's going to threaten me financially. Even though it's going against my principles, I need to like provide for my family, of course. Now, he was someone who was he probably had enough money where he could afford to do this. He eventually sort of like disappeared from the online space and then came back and rebranded himself. Now, I respect that a lot, but he's also someone who probably could afford to do that financially. So yeah, just to go back, the two options are if you go up to a content creator and you say, hey, it seems like your messaging isn't really or the audience that you're cultivating isn't in line with your stated principles. Now, the person might say, no, it's because I want the views, I want the clicks, I want the money. Or the other option is, after some time, I'm going to assume that you're kind of you're not being honest about what your stated principles are. Like, you secretly do have, yeah. So, but in either case, I am, and when I say accountability, again, I don't mean like actual punitive measures. when I say that, I mean I am now going to view you as someone who does not truly stand by the principles that they claim to represent.
Okay, that's more reasonable. I
Yeah.
think, and kind of to wrap things up here, two interesting cases of this: Russell Brand and Jimmy Dore. Now
Oh
they're
yeah.
interesting cases. Jimmy Dore in particular, because he's a lefty. He's a lefty, but he's starting to make his bread and butter by criticizing Democrats. Now, it's kind of like one of the cases of an enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. So he attracts a lot of Trumpers and conservatives, I think, but they like him because he's criticizing moderate Dems, right, for not being progressive enough. So I wonder what Jimmy Dore thinks of his audience. And the same thing Russell Brand too, for that matter. Russell Brand, he's a lefty, really, but
Mhm.
you wouldn't necessarily think it if you watched a lot of his stuff, because they both know where their bread is buttered. Like, they're not going to go too far in that direction when the people who are being attracted to them are the people who don't like the mainstream narratives, right? The people who think there's some iffy stuff going on, and unfortunately, often there is a lot of iffy stuff going on. Hence, why someone like Russell Brand in particular, he's blown up. Like, he's blown up faster than almost anyone besides Joe Rogan at this point. And so it's like, for Russell Brand, it's like, I wonder what he's going to do moving forward, because I can't imagine his audience necessarily holds all the same ideals he does, and he could be considered a gateway to a lot of things. He's a go both ways, a gateway to the left or a gateway to the right. It's all just depends on how you look at it, right? And where they are coming in. But I think those would be two curious case studies.
Absolutely. Well, I know with Russell Brand and Jimmy Dore. Well, I know Jimmy Dore was with the Young Turks, and then that all blew up, and
Oh
then
yeah,
he kind of
they
went
hate
like,
each other now.
yeah, that's like whoa. Well, it's hard because, and again, you're right to kind of wrap it up, and I think we kind of it's good. I think we kind of loop back around. I think like naturally, I think it kind of like naturally loop back around. The 2 points, like the first point is, I will say it is difficult to. So, for example, with Russell Brand, is he someone who I don't want to say his true self, but like, are the views that he is putting out or the questions he's asking, are they genuinely what he thinks? Are those like actual things that he is actually curious about and the principles that he stands by? Same with Jimmy Dore. Or is it more of a, hey, I can capitalize on this audience because there's like a space in here to, get the views and get the clicks and get the money. But at the end of the day, does it really matter at the end of the day whether you actually believe this or you're just saying it to get the audience? At the end of the day, if you're still bringing people into, more, not really conspiracy, but more sort of like toxic
Questioning.
ways of thinking, then does it really matter at the end of the day? And then I guess the second, to sort of like wrap up the responsibility question, I think when we're talking about, does a content creator have a responsibility to do anything really? And when I say responsibility from like an actual like legal standpoint, from a punitive standpoint, no. I don't like, you're a content creator, you're putting out media that you put out, you can say whatever well, I mean, within reason, of course, but you can put out whatever content you see fit as long as it fits with YouTube's, standard copyright, whatever. However, when we're talking about sort of like a more ethical responsibility, the way I view content creators, the way I view whether or not I respect them or think that they're people worth talking to or think that they're people who I would recommend people listen to, is, are their stated principles reflected in their content? Because again, like that's I think the big issue with what I've had with Red Pill or Black Pill or whatever. Some of the things they say, I agree with. And some of the, if you like call them on it, it's like, hey, what are you trying to do? It's like, well, my principles are to help men or to like better men or to like protect men. All of that is great. But then when you see how that's reflected in their content they're putting out, and then the audience responds to it, and then you see those same people leaning into it, whether it's for this is what you've believed all along, like you're just lying and this is what you believe deep down, or you're betraying your principles and you just want to capitalize on the money and the views and the clicks. Either way, for me personally, I've lost respect for you as a content creator. I think when we're talking about accountability, I think we're talking about more in the sense of, or at least me, I'm talking more in the sense of we're holding each other accountable as people who seemingly hold the same principles. Like if you and I are people who are, it's like, hey, we want to actually, we truly want to help men. We truly want men to succeed and be better and be fulfilled, whether that's with women or without women. We truly are after that. So if we see other people, regardless of what they state their principles are, if we see other people who are acting or behaving in a way that seems to betray that seems antithetical to those principles, I think it is a responsibility for people like you and me to call that out.
Well, I don't disagree with that. And I think how we call that out would be, like I said, baby, just some conversations perhaps, and on air or not. I think that would help. I think that would be a good thing to do. But all right, Mac, anything else you wanted to say here before we close this thing down?
No, I think we covered it. I think that worked out well. We kind of went all over the place, but it seemed like we sort of started off with the responsibility question, and then we kind of naturally looped back around.
Yeah, I mean, I do go all over the place when I talk to people, and I don't really have. I have some general guidelines of what I talk about, but I don't like to plan it out too thoroughly because I'd rather just have the conversation go where it goes.
It kind of becomes stilted at that point.
Right.
I guess we didn't touch on Tate all that much.
Yeah, everyone's talked about him so far.
I was gonna say it seems like it'd just be beating a dead horse at this point. The only thing I will say is, like, again, to kind of go back to, I think the general theme of this, it isn't so much. I don't really think Tate's anything new or that special. I think he's just like the next person. Like we've seen a lot of these guys before, guys like him. I think the issue is that, and this is what I said before or this is what I said in my dating video. It's, if you have a problem with a lot of these guys, gravitating towards like these toxic gurus, these guys who are giving them bad advice. On one hand, I think you should absolutely be free to criticize them. But if you aren't offering them any alternative, when that kid listens to you and it's like, hey, fuck Andrew Tate, and the kid is like, okay, so what should I do? If you don't have an answer for them, if you don't have a direction to point them, don't be surprised when that same kid runs back to Tate. I think if you're going to criticize, you have to. And I've actually heard a lot of people say this, and I don't agree with it at all. It's like, well, pointing out problems doesn't mean that you have to have solutions. And it's like,
it leaves them in no man's land at that point.
I kind of think you have to give them some idea. You have to give them at least, like, it's like, oh, hey, like I see this all the time. It's like, well, I'm really unsuccessful with women. It's like, well, you don't want to go to the pickup artists and red pill guys. And it's like, okay, I won't. What should I do? And then I don't know, like, just be confident. And it's like, that's like, that's just like, you're being condescending at that point. You're almost being insulting.
A lot of people just like tearing someone else down a little bit and criticizing someone else's thoughts or opinions or whatever. And then, like you said, they don't really have anything to fill in that gap. They're not going to offer you a solution. They're just going to tell you what not to do.
Yeah. And again,
there's a lot of that everywhere.
And again, I think both parts are important. I think absolutely if like Fresh and Federolo or Andrew Tate says some stupid ass shit, absolutely roast the fucking shit out of them. Absolutely. However, when those people who were kind of drawn to them for whatever reason, whether they're, lack of direction, lack of sense of masculinity, for whatever reason, when they turn around and come to you, again, if you're gonna like throw shit out there, I think that you should have something to back it up. You should be able
I'd
to
say to
give
all of
guys,
them.
yeah, exactly. You should be able to give them some direction. Like you can't,
Well, I'd
because
say
again,
to
if you're
them, they got
just
to be discerning a little bit, right? Don't take
yeah,
any of them for what they're saying as gospel. Just like they say, don't put women on the pedestal. Don't put any of them on the pedestal either. You take what you like, you leave the rest, and don't just take any of it for gospel. It's like, listen, see what they say, but then see if it actually applies to your life, because not everything will. And if it's not your experience, it doesn't actually turn into what you see in the real world, then you leave that part, right? But don't, like you said before, come in with the thinking that, oh, I learned this in the black pill or the red pill space, so this is what's going to be. It's going to be just like this in the real world. And it's not. It's not always going to be. But like you said, when some guys are younger, they're going to have a hard time with this. They're going to stumble through it. It is what it is. I don't know what the solution is in this regard, but I do agree if someone's going to bad talk or call out some smack on someone, they should have something to replace it with and say, well, if you're not going to do that, then you might want to do this. I think
or at the very least, like, don't be surprised if the person who like, hey, don't listen to Andrew Tate, and it's like, okay, well, do you have anything to tell me? And you're like, no. Don't be surprised if you see that guy back
But the
following
people
you.
who say that kind of stuff, right? It's not even that they care about the person who's seeking Andrew Tate. It's more like they just don't like Andrew Tate. They don't care about the person that actually might go seek out help from him. They don't care about the actual person. They just don't like Andrew Tate. And so they'll say that.
It goes back to your point about like the people who were like, who got call Andrew Tate like an incel or call like Red Pill dudes incels. You're kind of like, you're literally backing up what this person, like, I agree with you. Like these Red Pill dudes, like they fucking suck. But when you call them incels and when you like make fun of their tiny dicks or shit like that, you're only proving the Red Pill dudes right. Like you're only driving these like young guys who are insecure back into their arms, because on one hand you're saying, hey, they're wrong, but then you are basically like, you're wrong that like people are like, if you're like a guy who has like, you should define your success of who you are based on women. But then when you call them incel, you're basically saying you're a loser because you don't have success with women. And if you're going to do that, then like, you're not like, I don't personally see that people as on my side. If you're that person, again, I agree with you. Like, do you actually care about the fate of this guy who's, again, like, that's why I think the issue really isn't Andrew Tate or Red Pill at all. The focus is sometimes, I think, too much on, like, again, like Rolo, like Fresh and Fit, Andrew Tate. A lot of these guys have been thoroughly roasted. A lot of what they said has been like just driven into the ground as to why it's wrong.
It's the same thing with Trump, right?
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
It's all the symptoms of problems, but the real issue is, why are so many people drawn to these kinds of people?
And what resulted in so many young guys listening to like Rolo and being like, oh yeah, he makes sense. Like that, like something is like incredibly wrong there, in my opinion.
That's a good thing to get to the bottom of.
Yeah.
All right, man. Thanks for coming on, Mac. I think we talked about a lot of good stuff here today, and hopefully the people that listen to this will be helped in some way by what we talked about.
Hopefully. Thank you for having me on, my man.
You got it, brother. You have a good one.
You as well. Take care.